Hello, welcome to the channel. Before starting the story, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. It's very important to me. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button. All of this because the early morning mist hung over Voyageurs National Park like a delicate veil, cloaking the towering pines and the glassy surface of the water in an ethereal stillness. Mark sat in his small fishing boat, the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull his only companion. With practiced ease, he cast his line into the tranquil depths, feeling the cool nip of the crisp air mingling with the warmth of the rising sun. This was a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world faded, leaving only the soft sounds of nature and the occasional call of a distant loon. As he waited for a bite, Mark let his mind wander. He had always found solace in the solitude of the lake, away from the crowded streets of Minneapolis and the relentless pace of urban life. Here, time seemed to stretch infinitely, allowing him to reconnect with himself, to breathe deeply and reflect on the simplicity of existence. His thoughts drifted to the worries of life back home, the deadlines at work, the bills piling up, and the nagging feeling that he was missing something vital in his life. Suddenly, a sharp tug on his line jolted him from his reverie. "Gotcha," he exclaimed, a smile breaking across his face. He began to reel in the catch, the thrill of the moment quickening his pulse. But as he focused on the fight between himself and the fish, a fleeting shadow flickered across the surface of the lake, drawing his gaze downwards. Mark squinted, and his heart nearly stopped. Instead of his own familiar reflection staring back at him, he saw a grotesque face, twisted features, hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted into a silent scream. Panic surged through him, a primal instinct taking over as he stumbled back, nearly capsizing the small boat. The fish slipped from his grasp, splashing back into the water, but Mark hardly noticed. All he could focus on was the horrifying visage that seemed to beckon him with an unholy allure. "What the hell?" he gasped, his voice barely a whisper, lost in the vastness of the wilderness. The face remained, hovering just beneath the surface, as if waiting for him to lean closer. Heart racing, he scrambled for the paddles, his hands shaking as he splashed frantically, pushing the boat away from the nightmarish reflection. The mist swirled around him, thickening as he paddled furiously toward the shore, desperation fueling his movements. His thoughts raced, a chaotic jumble of fear and confusion. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by too many hours alone in nature? He had always prided himself on being a rational man, grounded in reality. Yet, as he navigated the boat back to solid ground, he couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in his chest. What had he just seen? When the boat finally scraped against the rocky shore, Mark leaped out, his legs unsteady as he stumbled onto the land. He turned back to the water, half expecting to see the face reappear, but the lake lay calm and undisturbed, reflecting the surrounding trees like a mirror. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart, but the image of that horrifying visage clung to him like a shadow. "Get a grip, Mark," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his disheveled hair. It was just a trick of the light. But even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He hiked back to his car, each step heavy with the weight of his thoughts. The morning air felt suddenly oppressive, thick with an unshakable unease. As he drove away from the park, the beauty of the landscape blurred into a backdrop of swirling colors, his mind too occupied with the haunting reflection to appreciate the serenity. What had he seen? Why did it feel like a warning? Back in the city, the normalcy of life felt hollow. The bustling streets and the cacophony of sounds seemed foreign to him. Mark parked his car and sat in silence for a moment, staring at the bustling people around him, each caught in their own lives, oblivious to the dread that had taken root in his heart. He stepped out, the sound of his footsteps echoing in his mind like a metronome counting down to some unseen doom. At work, he tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the lake. The image of that face haunted him, flickering in and out of his mind like a broken film reel. He rubbed his eyes, trying to dispel the fatigue that seemed to cling to him. "Hey, Mark," called out his colleague, Lisa, her voice pulling him back to reality. "You okay? You look a bit pale." "Yeah, just a rough night," he replied, forcing a smile. "Didn't sleep much." "Fishing again?" she asked, tilting her head curiously. "Something like that," he muttered, his gaze drifting out the window, where the city's skyline loomed like a jagged tooth against the fading light. "Don't overdo it, all right? We need you in one piece," she teased lightly, but Mark only nodded absently, the weight of her words lost on him as he continued to grapple with his unsettling experience. As the day wore on, the dizziness began to set in, a light spinning sensation that made him pause at his desk. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, but the edges of his sight blurred, and he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "What is wrong with me?" he murmured, pressing his palms against his temples, hoping to push back the impending headache. That night, sleep eluded him, and the reflection returned, more vivid than before. He lay in bed, the darkness pressing in around him, and the face reappeared, its hollow eyes boring into his soul. It whispered unintelligible words that sent chills down his spine, and he found himself drenched in sweat, gasping for breath as he jerked awake. The room was dark, the silence oppressive, and he could still feel the weight of those eyes upon him as if they were watching from the shadows. The following morning, Mark found himself standing in front of a doctor's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He had tried to convince himself that the dizziness was nothing more than fatigue, that the reflection was just a figment of his imagination, but deep down, he knew better. Something was wrong. The doctor listened as he recounted his symptoms, nodding seriously, the lines around his eyes deepening with concern. "Mark, we need to run some tests," the doctor said, his voice steady but laced with an underlying urgency. "Dizziness and blurred vision can be symptoms of a number of conditions, but we need to rule out anything serious." The words hung in the air like an ominous cloud, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He nodded, feeling detached from the reality of it all, as if he were watching himself from a distance. The doctor's office was suddenly too bright, too sterile, and he could feel the weight of that grotesque face lurking in the corners of his mind. As the doctor prepared for the tests, Mark's thoughts spiraled. Was the reflection a premonition, a warning of something lurking within him? He clenched his fists, anxiety gripping him tightly. What if it's something serious, he thought, the fear threatening to overwhelm him. The face in the water had felt like a curse, but what if it was also a warning, a harbinger of a truth he wasn't ready to face? Hours later, as he left the office with a referral for an MRI, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. The encounter at the lake had felt like a brush with the supernatural, an intrusion into a reality he had never known existed. He was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he understood about himself, about life, and about the thin veil that separated the ordinary from the extraordinary. With every passing moment, the memory of the grotesque face lingered, and Mark knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had only begun to scratch the surface of something far deeper than he could comprehend. The path ahead was uncertain, but as he looked out at the bustling city, he felt the faintest flicker of resolve igniting within him. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on, driven by the haunting visage that had unwittingly awakened something within him, a desperate need to understand the truth. Mark stumbled out of his apartment, the weight of his recent experience still clinging to him like a damp fog. The city, with its sharp lines and bustling sounds, felt alien after his time in the serene embrace of Voyageurs National Park. He took a deep breath, the scent of asphalt and exhaust filling his lungs, and tried to shake off the memories of the grotesque face that had haunted him since his return. With every step towards the subway station, he felt a pulsing anxiety in his chest, as if the city itself was echoing the dread that had settled into his bones. As he entered the crowded subway, he found himself clutching the metal pole, his mind racing. The faces around him blurred, their features indistinct and merging into a faceless crowd. He could feel the dizziness creeping in again, a familiar sensation that twisted his stomach. It wasn't just the jostling of the train, it was something deeper, a disorientation that left him questioning what was real. Was the face he had seen in the water a figment of his imagination, or was it a harbinger of something more sinister? "Hey, man, you alright?" A voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Mark turned to find a fellow passenger looking at him with concern. The man was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with tousled hair and a friendly expression. "Yeah, just a bit dizzy," Mark replied, forcing a smile that felt foreign on his face. "I was out fishing last weekend, and I think I might have gotten a little too much Sunday." The man nodded, but Mark could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Fishing, huh? Sounds peaceful. Where do you usually go?" "Voyageurs National Park," Mark said, the name slipping from his tongue like an incantation. Instantly, he was transported back to the stillness of the lake, the gentle lapping of water against his boat, and the eerie moment when the reflection had morphed into something unrecognizable. He shook his head, dispelling the images. "It's beautiful up there. Must be nice to get away from the city," the man offered, glancing at the other passengers, who were engrossed in their phones. "I could use a break from this madness." Mark nodded but didn't respond. Instead, he felt a surge of irritation at himself for bringing up the lake. The memory of that face threatened to engulf him again, and he focused on the rhythmic sway of the subway instead. Just as the train screeched to a halt, Mark felt the familiar wave of dizziness sweep over him, stronger this time. He gripped the pole tightly, his knuckles whitening. As he exited the train, he staggered slightly, the ground feeling uneven beneath him. "You sure you're okay?" the young man called after him, concern etched on his features. "Yeah, I'm fine," Mark shouted back, forcing his legs to carry him through the throng of commuters. He could hear the murmur of voices, the sound of footsteps, but it all felt muffled, as if he were submerged underwater. He needed to get to work, to focus on something other than the swirling chaos in his mind. In the office, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and Mark settled into his cubicle, attempting to drown out the world with the hum of his computer. But the screen blurred, the text swimming before his eyes. He rubbed them vigorously, hoping to clear the fog, but the dizziness persisted, like a shadow lurking at the edges of his vision. "Hey, Mark. You coming to the meeting?" His colleague, Jenna, poked her head over the cubicle wall, her auburn hair catching the light. "Yeah, just a sec," he replied, forcing his voice to sound steady. He took a moment to collect himself, breathing deeply as he stood up. As he walked toward the conference room, he felt a wave of nausea wash over him, and he paused for a moment, resting his hand against the cool surface of the wall. "Mark?" Jenna's voice broke through his fog. "Are you sure you're all right? You look a bit pale." "I'm fine, really," he insisted, but the words felt hollow. "Just a little tired." "Maybe you should see a doctor," she suggested, her brow furrowing in concern. "You've been looking off for a while now. Don't ignore it." Mark forced a smile, but inside, a knot of fear twisted tighter. "Thanks, Jenna. I'll think about it." As the meeting droned on, Mark struggled to focus. His colleagues discussed numbers and projections, but he found himself staring blankly at the PowerPoint slides, the words blurring into a haze. In the back of his mind, the face from the lake loomed, a constant reminder of his disintegrating reality. After the meeting, he retreated to the break room, seeking solace in a cup of coffee. As he stood at the counter, pouring the steaming liquid, he caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of the window. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw it again, the grotesque face staring back at him, twisted and malevolent. He blinked, and it was gone, replaced by his own worn expression. "Hey, you okay?" Jenna reappeared, holding a snack. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," he repeated, but the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "Really, it's nothing." "Mark," she said, her voice softening, "it's not nothing if it's affecting you this much. You need to take care of yourself." "I will," he promised, but as he sipped his coffee, he felt the warmth seep through him, battling against the cold dread that had taken root in his heart. The memory of the lake, of the face, of the still water, felt like a warning he couldn't shake. That evening, he found himself staring at the walls of his apartment, the silence almost suffocating. He tried to distract himself with television, but the images flickered past his eyes without registering. Eventually, he surrendered to his thoughts, grappling with the reality of his situation. The dizziness, the blurred vision, it all pointed to something deeper, something he didn't want to confront. He picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number for his family doctor. His finger hovered over the screen for a moment, and then he pressed it, the call connecting with a sharp ring that echoed through the silence of his apartment. "Dr. Thompson's office. How can I help you?" the receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional. I need to make an appointment," Mark stammered, his heart racing. "Of course. What seems to be the issue?" "I've been having some vision problems," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dizziness, blurred vision. I think I need to get checked out. Let's get you in as soon as possible. How does tomorrow at 10 a.m. sound?" "That works," he replied, his heart pounding in his chest. After hanging up, he felt a mix of relief and dread. The decision had been made. He would face whatever was lurking in the shadows of his mind. The night dragged on, and Mark lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Shadows danced in the corners of his room, and he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The face from the lake invaded his thoughts, whispering unrecognizable words that sent chills racing down his spine. He turned on his side, pulling the blankets tighter around him, trying to ward off the creeping fear. Morning arrived with a muted light filtering through his blinds, and Mark felt as if he had barely slept. He dressed mechanically, each action feeling like a chore, and made his way to the doctor's office, the knot in his stomach tightening with every step. The waiting room was filled with the muted sounds of rustling papers and the distant hum of conversation. He sat in a stiff plastic chair, his heart racing as he replayed every moment of the past few days in his mind. "Mark Miller?" A nurse called, and he stood up, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. As he followed her down the corridor, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, heightening his anxiety. The doctor greeted him with a warm smile, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling of dread that sat heavily on his chest. After a few standard questions and an examination, Dr. Thompson looked at him with a serious expression. "Mark, I'm going to need to conduct some tests," he said, his tone even but firm. "Given your symptoms, we need to rule out some possibilities." "Possibilities?" Mark echoed, his voice trembling. "Conditions affecting your vision can range from something minor to something more serious," the doctor explained. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but we need to be thorough. I'd like to schedule an MRI." The word felt like a punch to the gut. "An MRI?" "Yes," Dr. Thompson said, leaning forward slightly. It's a non-invasive way to take a closer look at your brain and identify any potential issues. Mark nodded, trying to process the information. The idea of something lurking in his brain, something that could be causing the visions, the dizziness, it was too much to bear. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll take this one step at a time," Dr. Thompson reassured him. "In the meantime, try to rest and avoid any situations that might exacerbate your symptoms. I'll have my assistant schedule the MRI, and we'll go from." Mark lay awake in bed, the darkness of the room pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. The familiar sounds of the city outside, cars honking, distant sirens, and the occasional thud of footsteps seemed muffled as he wrestled with the shadows of his thoughts. The reflection in the water haunted him, a grotesque face that felt all too real. He could almost hear its whispers, unintelligible yet laced with urgency, as if it were trying to convey a message meant solely for him. His mind raced back to the moment he had stumbled away from the lake, his heart pounding in his chest. The image of that face, contorted and twisted, lingered like a ghost, a constant reminder of the fragility of his perception. What did it mean? Why had he seen it? And why, after the doctor's cold diagnosis, did it feel like it was somehow connected to his fate? The clock on the bedside table ticked loudly, each second amplifying his anxiety. He threw the covers off and swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the coolness of the wooden floor against his feet. There was no use in trying to sleep. He had already tossed and turned too many times that night. Instead, he padded quietly to the kitchen, hoping that a glass of water might clear his mind. As he filled a glass at the sink, he caught a glimpse of himself in the window. The reflection was, thankfully, his own, but it felt like a hollow echo of the man he used to be. There was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a weight that pressed down on his shoulders. He took a sip, letting the cool liquid flow down his throat, but it did little to quench the fire of anxiety that burned within him. "Get a grip, Mark," he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the feeling of impending doom. "It's just a nightmare. Just your mind playing tricks on you." Yet deep down, he knew it was more than that. The doctor's words had rattled him to his core, and now he felt like a marionette, strings cut, flailing in uncertainty. That night, his dreams were a swirling tempest of images and sensations. He found himself back at the lake, the water shimmering under a silvery moon. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and he could hear the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. Just like before, he felt drawn to the water, an inexplicable pull that beckoned him closer. As he approached the edge, the surface of the lake began to ripple, and a familiar face emerged, more vivid and terrifying than he remembered. It stared back at him, eyes hollow yet filled with an intense sorrow that made Mark's heart race. The whispers returned, more distinct this time, though still unintelligible. He reached out a hand, as if he could touch that reflection, to understand it better. "Who are you?" he found himself asking, his voice barely a whisper, mingling with the sounds of the night. The face did not respond in words, but its expression shifted, morphing into something that resembled empathy. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. It was as if the water itself had a voice, and it spoke through the depths of his psyche. "Help me," the sound echoed in his mind, and he jerked back, startled. "Help you," he repeated, confusion clouding his thoughts. "Why? What do you want from me?" The apparition only stared, the sorrow in its eyes deepening. Mark felt tears prick at the corners of his own eyes, and he blinked them away, desperate to hold on to his composure. He was caught in a bizarre loop of fear and compassion, and it left him feeling powerless. "Mark," a voice broke through the haze of his dream, pulling him back to consciousness. He awoke in a cold sweat, the remnants of the dream still clinging to him like a heavy fog. It took him a moment to realize he was still in his bedroom, the early morning light creeping through the curtains. With great effort, he sat up and rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the disorientation. The dream felt too real, too significant to dismiss. He couldn't ignore the connection he felt to that face, nor the urgency behind its silent plea. After breakfast, Mark decided to delve deeper into the mystery. He grabbed his laptop and settled into his worn-out chair, determined to uncover the lore surrounding the lake that had haunted him. As he typed Voyager's National Park legends into the search bar, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. What if there was something to this? Something that could give him insight into what he had witnessed. Hours passed as he sifted through articles and forum posts. The stories varied, but a consistent theme emerged. The lake was said to be a portal, a place where spirits could cross over into the world of the living. Many spoke of a vengeful spirit, a woman wronged in life who roamed the waters in search of those who had strayed too far from their rightful path. The Lake of Lost Souls, one article read, detailing the legend of a woman who had drowned in despair, her cries echoing through the waters. Those who see her face are warned of their own misdirection in life, a reflection of their innermost fears. Mark felt a chill creep up his spine. Could this be what he was experiencing? Was the face he saw warning, a manifestation of his fears about his health and impending mortality? He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. What if the reflection is a warning? He said aloud, his voice breaking the stillness of his apartment. What if I'm not just battling a tumor, but also something deeper within myself? The phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. He recognized the number instantly. It was Sarah, his sister. They hadn't spoken much since his diagnosis. The weight of his illness had created an uncomfortable distance between them. "Hey, Mark," she said, her voice warm yet tinged with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," he replied, trying to sound more composed than he felt. "Just trying to keep myself busy, you know?" "I get that," she said. "But you need to take care of yourself. Have you thought about talking to someone? A therapist, maybe?" "Yeah, I've considered it," he admitted. "But I don't want to burden anyone with my problems." "You're not a burden, Mark," she insisted. "We're family, and I'm here for you. Just promise me you'll reach out if you need anything." "I will," he said, feeling a swell of gratitude for her support. "Thanks, Sarah." After hanging up, Mark felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. It was a reminder that he was not alone in this fight, even if the shadows of his mind sometimes told him otherwise. But as much as he appreciated her concern, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was on a solitary journey, one that required him to confront the darkness within himself. Later that evening, he found himself back in front of the computer, drawn once again to the legends of the lake. He read about others who had faced the spirit and emerged transformed, their lives redirected after confronting their fears. Perhaps the apparition was not just a harbinger of doom, but a guide, a catalyst for change. "What if I'm meant to learn something?" he murmured to himself. "What if this is all part of a bigger picture?" Determined to find answers, he closed his laptop and grabbed a notebook, jotting down his thoughts. The words flowed like a river, ideas branching out as he explored the connection between his illness and the haunting face. "I need to go back," he wrote, the ink flowing freely. "I need to confront the face in the water. I need to know what it wants from me." As the night deepened and the city quieted, Mark made a decision. He would return to Voyager's National Park, not as a terrified fisherman, but as a seeker of truth. He would face the reflection that had haunted him, armed with newfound resolve and an understanding that he was not merely a victim of circumstance, but a participant in his own narrative. With a sense of purpose igniting within him, he drifted off to sleep, the echoes of the lake still dancing in the corners of his mind, urging him forward into the unknown. Mark stood at the edge of Voyagers National Park, the familiar sense of pine and damp earth swirling around him like an old friend. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the tranquil waters, but an unsettling tension clung to the air, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Today, he was not just a fisherman, he was a seeker, driven by an inexplicable urge to confront the shadows that had infiltrated his mind since that fateful day. With a camera slung around his neck and a fishing rod in hand, Mark felt an odd mix of determination and trepidation. The woods felt alive, whispering secrets that only he could hear. He took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill his lungs, but it was laced with an unease that felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. He stepped into his boat, the familiar creaking of the wooden hull a reminder of the countless times he had drifted over these waters, free from the burdens that now haunted him. As he paddled into the lake, memories of his last visit flooded back, each wave lapping against the boat echoing the fear he had felt when he first encountered the grotesque face in the water. It was just a trick of the light, he muttered to himself, trying to dispel the lingering dread that clung to his thoughts. But deep down, he knew the truth was more complicated than that. The reflection had been a catalyst, bringing to the surface the fears he had long buried, and now he was determined to find answers, whatever the cost. The lake was eerily still, the surface shimmering like glass under the fading sun. Mark maneuvered his boat toward the spot where he had seen the face. Each stroke of the paddle felt laborious, as if the water itself conspired to keep him from reaching his destination. The trees loomed over him, their gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him, judging him for returning. "All right, let's get this over with," he said aloud, his voice barely breaking the silence. He set the camera on the small ledge of his boat, adjusting the lens toward the water. The anticipation hung heavy in the air, and he could feel his heart racing, a primal response to the unknown that lay just beneath the surface. As he peered into the depths, the memories of his diagnosis replayed in his mind like a broken record. The doctor's words echoed: tumor, vision problems, uncertainty. Each term weighed heavily on his psyche, amplifying the anxiety that had taken root since that day in the office. The idea that the reflection had been a harbinger of his illness twisted in his gut, making him question everything he thought he knew about reality. "Focus," he whispered, shaking his head to clear it. He needed to be present, to confront whatever darkness had taken hold of him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he directed the camera toward the water, hoping to capture anything that might reveal the truth. Moments passed, and just as he began to doubt himself, a ripple disturbed the surface. He squinted, heart pounding, as he leaned closer. The water shimmered, and there it was, a fleeting glimpse of a face, grotesque and twisted, emerging from the depths. A chill raced down Mark's spine, and he felt a magnetic pull toward the reflection, as if it were beckoning him closer. "No, not again," he gasped, instinctively pulling back, but the face seemed to smile, a sinister invitation that sent a wave of terror coursing through him. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, the sound echoing across the water. The face remained silent, but he could feel its gaze penetrating through him, as if searching for something buried deep within his soul. It was both terrifying and oddly compelling, igniting a strange mix of fear and curiosity. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The world around him faded away, leaving only the face and the unsettling sense of connection he felt. "What do you want from me?" he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. The reflection rippled, distorting into an array of colors before settling back into the familiar visage. But this time, it was different. It felt more alive, more sentient. Mark's grip on the camera faltered as he leaned closer, the boat rocking slightly beneath him. The air turned thick with tension, and the atmosphere shifted, wrapping around him like fog. I can't keep running, he murmured, more to himself than to the apparition. I need to face this. Suddenly, the face contorted, morphing into a visage he recognized. It was a younger version of himself, eyes wide with fear, reflecting the confusion and uncertainty that had plagued him since childhood. Mark, the face whispered, the voice a haunting echo that resonated in his mind. You must understand. What do I need to understand? He asked, his voice trembling. The reflection shimmered again, and for a brief moment, he saw flashes of his life, moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and defeat, all intertwined. The image began to fade, but his heart raced with the urgency of it all. You're not alone in this, the voice continued, now a chorus of whispers that enveloped him. You've always had the power to change the course of your life. The darkness you fear is merely a part of you, waiting to be acknowledged. Mark's mind reeled at the revelation. Could it really be that simple? He thought of the doctor's words, the fear of the unknown that had taken root in his heart. But it's so easy to feel lost, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can fight this. The face seemed to soften, its expression shifting from malevolence to something resembling compassion. You've faced worse battles before, Mark. Trust in yourself. Embrace the fear, and you will find your way. As the words settled in his mind, Mark felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. He had always been a fighter, whether on the water or in life. Perhaps the reflection was not just a warning, but a guide, urging him to confront the truth of his existence. Okay, he said, determination creeping back into his voice. I'll confront it. I'll face whatever is lurking in the shadows. He raised the camera again, intent on capturing the moment, but the face began to dissolve, rippling away into the depths. Wait, he cried out, desperation surging through him. But it was too late. The water returned to its placid state, leaving Mark alone once more, the echo of the voice lingering in the air like a haunting melody. He stared at the calm surface, heart racing, mind swirling with questions and revelations. Did he really have the strength to confront his fears? Could he truly embrace the darkness that had haunted him for so long? As he sat in the boat, the reality of his situation pressed down on him. The diagnosis, the fear, the reflection, it was all interconnected in ways he was only beginning to understand. He needed to return home, to seek clarity and confront the shadows within him, but first, he had to process what he had just experienced. Maybe it wasn't just a reflection after all, he murmured to himself, staring into the depths of the lake. Maybe it was a part of me, showing me the way. The realization felt like a revelation, a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil that had consumed him since the moment he had seen that face. With a newfound resolve, Mark turned the boat back toward the shore, the rhythmic sound of the paddles cutting through the water providing a sense of calm. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, but he no longer felt afraid. Instead, he felt empowered, ready to face whatever awaited him beyond the trees. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was moving forward, embracing the unknown with open arms. As Mark plunged into the cool, murky waters of Voyageurs National Park, he felt an electric jolt, a mix of terror and exhilaration that coursed through him like a live wire. The water enveloped him, its coldness shocking against his skin, but it was not just the temperature that sent shivers down his spine. In the depths below, something stirred, a presence, a force that seemed to both beckon him and pull him under. Swirling visions danced in his mind, fragments of a life he had never lived but somehow recognized. The world above faded as he descended, the sunlight flickering through the surface like a fractured dream. He was not merely swimming, he was diving into a memory, a tapestry of sadness, betrayal, and longing that wove itself into the very fabric of his being. As he sank deeper, the water became a thick veil, obscuring his vision but heightening his other senses. He could feel the pulse of the lake, the heartbeat of something ancient and powerful, resonating with his own. Suddenly, he found himself in a different realm, a place where time and space intertwined with shadows of the past. There, before him, stood the apparition, the grotesque face that had haunted his waking hours, now animated and alive with sorrowful intensity. Its features were twisted, eyes brimming with unshed tears, yet there was an undeniable familiarity about it, a connection that struck a chord deep within him. "Mark," the spirit whispered, its voice echoing like a distant wind, filled with an ethereal quality that sent a chill through his bones. "You must listen." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words escaped. Instead, he felt a rush of emotions flood over him, fear, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. The spirit stepped closer, reaching out as if to grasp him, and in that moment, Mark was transported into a whirlwind of visions. He stood in a vast, barren landscape, the sun setting in hues of crimson and gold. There were shadows moving in the distance, figures entwined in a dance of betrayal and heartbreak. He watched as a woman, her face obscured by a veil of darkness, turned away from a man who reached out for her, desperation etched across his features. The scene shifted, and Mark found himself in a small cabin, filled with laughter and warmth, yet a palpable tension hung in the air, like a storm about to break. A child was playing, and he felt an inexplicable connection to the innocent joy radiating from the little one. "Do you see it now?" the apparition urged, its voice a haunting melody. "The ties that bind you to this place, to this pain." Mark gasped as he was pulled into another vision, one that felt all too real. He was standing in front of a mirror, gazing at a reflection that was not his own. The face staring back was a blend of hope and despair, a man standing at the crossroads of life. He could feel the weight of choices made and unmade, paths walked and abandoned. The reflection transformed, flickering between the spirit's grotesque visage and his own, a haunting reminder of the struggles he faced. "This is your truth," the spirit continued, its voice growing stronger. "The illness you fear, the darkness that clouds your vision, these are not merely curses. They are also blessings, markers on your path to understanding." Mark's heart raced as he battled to grasp the essence of the spirit's words. His illness had felt like a shroud, a heavy weight threatening to suffocate him. But as he stood there, witnessing the sorrow and regret of a past he did not fully understand, a realization began to dawn. Perhaps the reflection was not just a warning of his impending fate, but a call to confront the deeper truths buried within. "What do you mean?" he finally managed to ask, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "What truth?" The spirit's expression softened, the grotesque features momentarily fading into something more human. "You are caught in a cycle, Mark. A cycle of fear that blinds you to the beauty of life and the potential for healing. The vision you saw was a manifestation of your own doubts, your own pain. A reminder that the past does not have to define you." Mark felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, and an unfamiliar flicker of hope. "But how can I change it? I don't even know what's real anymore." "You have the power to rewrite your story," the spirit replied, stepping closer, its presence enveloping him in warmth. "Embrace the illness, the fear, and the darkness. Acknowledge them, and you will find the light that resides within you. It is through acceptance that you will discover the strength to heal." As the spirit's words echoed in his mind, Mark was thrust into yet another vision. This time, he stood on the edge of the lake, the familiar waters shimmering under the moonlight. He could see himself in the reflection, an image of a man at peace, unburdened by the weight of fear. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. The face that had haunted him was a part of his journey, a representation of everything he had yet to confront. Suddenly, the scene shifted again, and he found himself back underwater, the spirit's presence surrounding him like a protective cocoon. The cold water pressed against him, but instead of fearing it, he surrendered to the embrace, allowing it to wash over him. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, and felt a shift within, as if something long buried was finally being acknowledged. "You are not alone," the spirit whispered, its voice intertwining with the currents of the water. "Embrace the unknown, for therein lies your freedom." With those final words, Mark felt a surge of energy, a brilliant light illuminating the darkness that had shrouded him for so long. The visions began to fade, the spirit's presence dissipating like mist in the morning sun. As he resurfaced, gasping for air, he felt a profound sense of clarity wash over him, a realization that his journey was not merely about facing death, but about embracing life in its entirety. Breaking through the surface, Mark inhaled deeply, the fresh air filling his lungs and invigorating his spirit. He looked around, the familiar landscape of Voyageurs National Park now bathed in a golden light, vibrant and alive. The trees whispered secrets, and the water danced with the reflection of the sun, shimmering like 1,000 stars. With newfound determination, he swam to the shore, each stroke a testament to his resolve. He emerged from the water, the cold droplets cascading down his skin, but he felt transformed, as if the depths had washed away his fears and doubts. The encounter had been more than a haunting, it had been a catalyst for awakening. As he stood on the shore, Mark knew he had a choice to make. He could return to the city, burdened by the weight of his diagnosis and the specter of uncertainty, or he could embrace the truth the spirit had revealed. He could confront his illness, not as a death sentence, but as an opportunity to live fully and authentically. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. The journey was just beginning, and whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, no longer a solitary fisherman haunted by shadows, but a man reborn, ready to reclaim his life and write his own story. Mark awoke with a start, the remnants of his dreams slipping away like wisps of fog in the early morning light. The ghostly face that had haunted him for what felt like an eternity lingered in his thoughts, but it was no longer a source of terror. Instead, it had transformed into something more profound, a catalyst for change. He sat up in bed, the sunlight pouring through the window, illuminating the cluttered room that mirrored the chaos in his mind. For the first time in days, there was a sense of clarity. He could feel the weight of his fears beginning to lift, replaced by an unsettling yet invigorating resolve. He dressed quickly, his heart racing as he made his way to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, he focused on his reflection. "I see you," he whispered, an almost ritualistic acknowledgement of the man staring back at him. "And I'm ready to face whatever comes next." The face in the water had shown him a glimpse of something deeper, his own mortality and the choices he had been avoiding. It was time to confront not just the physical manifestations of his illness, but also the emotional turmoil that had been brewing beneath the surface. The city felt alien to him as he stepped outside. The hustle and bustle of urban life contrasted sharply with the serene wilderness of Voyageurs National Park. People rushed past him, their faces a blur of indifference, as he walked with purpose toward the medical center. Each step echoed in his mind, reminding him of the decisions that lay ahead. He had an appointment with a specialist, a chance to untangle the web of confusion surrounding his health. As he entered the building, the sterile environment enveloped him, a stark contrast to the wild freedom of the lake. He checked in at the front desk, where a nurse greeted him with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Dr. Hughes will see you shortly. Please have a seat." Mark nodded, forcing himself to breathe deeply as he settled into the waiting area. The walls were adorned with motivational posters, each one a reminder to embrace life despite its challenges. He felt a flicker of irony at the messages, considering how he had flirted with the notion of death just days ago. Today's the day, he murmured to himself, repeating the mantra like a shield against the darkness that had threatened to engulf him. When he was finally called into the examination room, he felt a surge of adrenaline. Dr. Hughes, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind rectangular glasses, entered the room with a clipboard in hand. "Good to see you again, Mark. How have you been feeling?" His tone was calm and reassuring. Mark hesitated, the weight of his previous fears still fresh in his memory. "I've been better, I guess. I'm still struggling with what you found during my last visit." He glanced down, fidgeting with his hands. Dr. Hughes nodded, his expression serious yet compassionate. "I understand. The initial tests indicated a potential tumor, but I want to assure you that further analysis has yielded new results." He paused, gauging Mark's reaction. "The scans were misinterpreted. You do not have a tumor." Mark's heart raced, a mixture of disbelief and relief flooding through him. "Are you serious? So, I'm healthy?" The words felt foreign on his tongue, as if he were testing a new reality. "Yes, completely. There are no signs of any abnormalities. It seems the symptoms you experienced could have been related to stress or anxiety, which can manifest physically." Dr. Hughes leaned back, allowing the news to sink in. "I recommend some lifestyle changes and possibly speaking with a therapist to help manage the stress." Mark's mind reeled. A wave of emotions crashed over him, and he struggled to contain the tears that threatened to spill. "I don't even know what to say. I thought I was dying. I thought my life was over." Dr. Hughes offered a reassuring smile. "Sometimes, our minds can play tricks on us, especially in times of uncertainty. It's important to remember that fear can often amplify our perceptions of reality." Mark wiped his eyes, an unexpected relief settling over him. "I saw a face in the water," he confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I thought it was a warning, but now, maybe it was something else. Maybe it was just me, confronting my fears." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "Our minds can manifest our deepest fears in surprising ways. It sounds like this experience, while harrowing, has also led you to a place of self-discovery." "Self-discovery," Mark echoed, letting the phrase resonate within him. The face in the water had been a reflection, not just of his illness, but of the emotional turmoil he had been avoiding. "I need to embrace that, don't I?" "Absolutely," Dr. Hughes affirmed. "You have the power to change your life, to confront the fears that held you captive. This could be a turning point for you, Mark." As he left the medical center, the city felt different, brighter, more vibrant. The sun shone down on him, casting a warm glow that seemed to infuse him with energy. He walked with purpose, feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. He was free. Free from the specter of illness, and free from the chains of his own fears. That evening, he found himself in a familiar place, the lake. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, reminiscent of the fire that had once burned in his soul. He stood at the water's edge, the cool breeze ruffling his hair, and looked into the depths. "Hello again," he whispered, addressing the water as if it were a friend. "I'm back." In that moment of solitude, he felt a connection to the spirit of the lake, not as a menacing force, but as a guide. The face he had seen before was no longer a source of fear, but a mirror reflecting his own struggles and triumphs. "Thank you," he said aloud, his voice carrying softly over the water. "Thank you for showing me what I needed to see." The water shimmered in response, and for the first time, he felt peace. There were no more shadows lurking beneath the surface, no more haunting reminders of his vulnerability. Instead, he was filled with a sense of purpose, a desire to embrace life, to explore the depths of his existence without fear. As he turned to leave, a thought struck him. He needed to share this newfound understanding with others. He could help those who felt lost, who battled their own demons in silence. He would write, he would speak, he would be a beacon of hope for those struggling with their fears. With each step away from the lake, he felt lighter, as if he were shedding the skin of the man he once was. The darkness that had threatened to consume him transformed into a springboard for growth and healing. The face in the water had been a warning, yes, but it had also been a guide, showing him the way to reclaim his life. As he reached his car, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows behind him. Mark opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, a smile spreading across his face. "Let's go, life," he said, igniting the engine. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." With that, he drove away from the lake, leaving behind the fears that had once held him captive. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was also filled with promise. And for the first time in a long while, Mark felt truly alive. Ava stood at the edge of the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The towering trees loomed over her like ancient guardians, their leaves whispering secrets in the gentle breeze. She inhaled deeply, the crisp, earthy scent of pine filling her lungs, reminding her why she had chosen biology as her field of study. This forest was a living laboratory, and she was eager to uncover its mysteries. With her backpack secured and her notebook in hand, she took her first steps into the thicket. The ground was soft beneath her hiking boots, covered in a rich layer of fallen leaves and pine needles. Sunlight filtered through the branches above, casting dappled shadows that danced around her. She was surrounded by life, the rustle of small creatures scurrying through the underbrush, the distant call of birds echoing through the trees. Ava felt invigorated. She was exactly where she wanted to be. As she moved deeper into the forest, she began her research. She collected samples of soil, examined the flora, and meticulously noted the various insects that buzzed around her. Ava was in her element, scribbling observations in her notebook, her pen flying across the pages as she documented everything she saw. "Ava, there you are," a familiar voice called out, breaking her concentration. She looked up to see Jake and Mia approaching, their own backpacks slung over their shoulders and smiles plastered across their faces. Jake had an easygoing charm, a tall figure with tousled hair and a knack for making everyone laugh. Mia was more reserved but had an infectious enthusiasm for nature that matched Ava's. "Hey, I was just collecting some samples," Ava replied, her excitement palpable. "What about you two?" "We found a clearing up ahead," Mia said, her eyes sparkling. "It's beautiful. You have to see it." Jake nodded in agreement. "And there's this huge tree with a hollow trunk. You could probably fit inside it." Ava chuckled, her heart warming at the camaraderie they shared. "Lead the way. I could use a break from all this." They trekked through the underbrush, the sound of their laughter mingling with the forest ambience. As they reached the clearing, Ava gasped. The sun illuminated an open space filled with vibrant wildflowers, their colors bursting against the backdrop of green. A small brook trickled nearby, the water sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. "Wow, this is incredible," Ava exclaimed, setting her backpack down to take in the scene. "I could spend all day here." Jake plopped down on a large rock, dipping his fingers into the cool water. "This is the perfect spot to refresh and recharge. Nature's a great therapist, you know?" Mia joined him, kneeling by the brook to splash water on her face. "And it's so peaceful. Just listen to the sounds." Ava settled beside them, closing her eyes for a moment to absorb the serenity. She could hear the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant call of a woodpecker, and the faint gurgle of the stream. It was a symphony of nature, a reminder of why she loved the outdoors. They spent the afternoon exchanging stories and marveling at the ecosystem surrounding them. Ava shared her enthusiasm for her research, explaining the significance of the samples she was collecting. "I want to study the biodiversity here," she said excitedly. "Every organism plays a role, and understanding that can help us protect these habitats." "Sounds like a noble cause," Jake teased, a smirk on his face. "Just don't forget about us little people while you're saving the world." Mia nudged Jake playfully. "Shut up, you know Ava's going to be a great biologist one day." Ava blushed at the compliment, grateful for their support. "Thanks, guys. I just want to do my part." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the clearing, they reluctantly made their way back to their campsite. Ava felt a sense of contentment wash over her. This was what she had dreamed of, a summer spent immersed in nature, surrounded by friends who shared her passion. That night, Ava crawled into her tent, exhausted yet exhilarated. She zipped up the entrance, cocooning herself in the warmth of her sleeping bag. The sounds of the forest enveloped her, a comforting lullaby that soon lulled her into a peaceful slumber. But as the night deepened, a faint buzzing began to penetrate her dreams. At first, it was barely noticeable, like the distant hum of insects. Ava dismissed it, rolling over and burying her head deeper into her sleeping bag. She was in the woods, of course, there would be bugs. Yet, as the hours passed, the buzzing grew louder, more insistent. It crept into her consciousness, pulling her from the depths of sleep. Ava's brow furrowed as she sat up, blinking into the dark. The tent felt stifling, the air thick with humidity. She could hear the buzzing now, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the forest. "What is that?" she muttered to herself, a shiver running down her spine. She unzipped the tent flap and poked her head out, scanning the area. The moonlight illuminated the trees, their silhouettes stretching like skeletal fingers against the night sky. Everything seemed still, the only sound the relentless buzzing that tugged at her mind. "It's just insects," she told herself, taking a deep breath to calm her racing heart. "You're just tired." But as she lay back down, the buzzing persisted, growing louder and more disorienting. It felt as if it were coming from all directions, a cacophony that throbbed in her ears. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but no matter how hard she tried, the sound burrowed deeper into her thoughts, gnawing at her sanity. Hours dragged on, and sleep evaded her. The buzzing morphed into something else, a whispering, indistinct voices that seemed to call out to her from the shadows. Ava's heart raced, and she gripped her sleeping bag tightly, her mind racing with fear and confusion. "Get a grip, Ava," she muttered under her breath, forcing herself to breathe deeply. "You're just imagining things." But the buzzing and the whispers intertwined, creating a symphony of dread that wrapped around her like a vice. She could feel her resolve slipping, the exhaustion seeping into her bones as the night wore on. As dawn approached, the first light of morning crept through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. Ava finally drifted into a restless sleep, but the buzzing remained, lingering at the edge of her consciousness, a haunting reminder of the night's turmoil. When morning broke, she awoke feeling disoriented, the buzzing still echoing in her mind. Determined to shake off the unease, she crawled out of her tent, the cool morning air refreshing against her skin. The forest was alive with sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but the buzzing lingered, a persistent undertone that refused to fade. Ava shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "It's just fatigue," she reassured herself as she began her morning routine, brewing coffee over the camp stove and preparing for another day of research. The forest was beautiful, and she would not let a little noise ruin her passion for discovery. As she sipped her coffee, she felt a nagging sense of foreboding, but she brushed it aside. Today was another opportunity to immerse herself in the wonders of nature, and she was determined to make the most of it. Little did she know that the buzzing would soon escalate into something far more sinister, intertwining her fate with the secrets the forest harbored. Ava sat on a moss-covered log, her notebook spread open on her lap, the faint scent of damp earth and pine filling the air. The sun filtered through the dense canopy above, casting dappled shadows that danced across her pages. She had been in the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest for nearly a week, and while the initial thrill of her field research had fueled her energy, she now felt an unsettling presence gnawing at her concentration. The buzzing sound, which had first been a minor irritant, was growing louder, a persistent hum that seemed to echo her thoughts and drown out the beauty of her surroundings. "Hey, Ava. You coming to dinner?" Mia's voice cut through the forest symphony, pulling Ava from her spiraling thoughts. She looked up to see Mia and Jake approaching, their faces lit with the warm glow of camaraderie. Ava forced a smile, closing her notebook and tucking it under her arm. "Yeah, I'll be right there." As they walked back to the campsite, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot provided a comforting rhythm. Jake was animated, recounting a story from their earlier research excursion. And then I swear, the deer just froze like a statue. I thought it was a statue at first, but nope, just a very confused deer. Mia laughed, her eyes sparkling. "You should have seen your face. I thought you were going to burst into tears." Ava chuckled lightly, though the laughter felt distant, muffled by the buzzing that had become a constant companion. She didn't want to dampen their spirits with her growing anxiety, so she kept her concerns to herself. Dinner was a simple affair, canned beans heated over a small campfire, the flames crackling and sparkling against the night sky. The three of them shared stories, laughter punctuating the darkness, but Ava found it hard to focus. The buzzing grew louder, intermingling with their chatter, creating a dissonance that made her heart race. "What's wrong with you, Ava?" Mia asked suddenly, her voice tinged with concern. "You've been kind of quiet tonight." Ava shook her head, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess. The fieldwork has been a lot more intensive than I thought." Jake leaned in, his brow furrowed. "You sure you're okay? We can take a break if you need it. I mean, it's just research, right? It's not worth you stressing out over." No, I'm fine," Ava insisted, though a tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I just want to get this data collected. I'm so close to finishing my project." Mia exchanged a glance with Jake, and Ava could feel the weight of their concern pressing down on her. "Okay, but don't push yourself too hard," Mia said softly. "We're here for you." Later that night, as Ava lay in her tent, the buzzing was no longer a mere annoyance, but a presence that filled the silence. It was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, wrapping around her thoughts like a thick fog. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to sleep, but the sound was relentless, growing louder and more insistent. It seemed to seep into her very bones, vibrating through her body. "Just insects," she murmured to herself, clutching her sleeping bag tighter. "Just insects." But as the night wore on, the buzzing morphed into something else, whispers. The voices were soft and indistinct, flitting in and out of her consciousness. Ava pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block them out, but they seeped through the cracks of her resolve. "Stop it," she hissed into the darkness, her heart racing. "It's just your imagination. Get a grip." The night stretched on, and with it, her sanity began to fray. She could no longer distinguish between the buzzing and the whispers, each feeding into her growing sense of dread. Sleep evaded her, and as dawn broke, she was left exhausted and disoriented. The following day, she trudged through her research with a heavy heart, the buzzing throbbing in her ears like a second heartbeat. The forest, once vibrant and alive, now felt oppressive, each rustle of leaves and chirp of birds amplified into a cacophony that threatened to swallow her whole. "Hey, Ava. We're thinking of checking out that waterfall nearby after lunch. Want to join?" Mia called out as they gathered their gear. Ava hesitated, the thought of leaving her work behind gnawing at her. "I don't know. I really need to focus on collecting these samples." Jake frowned, concern etched on his face. "You've been working non-stop. A break might do you good. Plus, the waterfall is supposed to be beautiful. Fresh air, a little adventure." "I can't," Ava said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I really need to get this done." Mia looked taken aback, her smile faltering. "Okay, if you're sure. Just take care of yourself, all right?" As they walked away, Ava felt a pang of guilt settle in her stomach. She wanted to join them, to feel the thrill of exploration, but the buzzing was a weight on her mind, chaining her to her research. She returned to her task, but the whispers intensified, swirling around her like a tempest. That night, Ava found herself in her tent again, the familiar buzzing now an unbearable symphony. The whispers clawed at her psyche, growing clearer, more insistent. She could almost make out words, fragments that slipped through her fingers like smoke. Fear gripped her heart as she realized that the buzzing wasn't merely a product of her overexertion. It was something else, something that felt alive. "Stop. Please," she cried out into the darkness, her voice trembling. "I don't understand." But the forest remained silent, save for the relentless buzzing that crescendoed into a roar. Ava buried her head under her sleeping bag, desperate to escape the noise, but it was no use. The forest was alive, and it was watching. The next morning, the sun rose with a muted glow, casting long shadows that crept through the trees. Ava emerged from her tent, bleary-eyed and disoriented. The forest felt different, more sinister, as if it had shifted overnight. The buzzing was still there, but now it seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. She stumbled through her tasks, her mind clouded with fatigue. Each sample she collected felt like a monumental effort, the whispers echoing in her ears, taunting her. "You're not alone," they seemed to say. "We're here. We're waiting." Ava shook her head violently, trying to dispel the thoughts that clung to her like a shroud. She needed to focus, she needed to push through this. But as the day wore on, her resolve began to crumble. The buzzing intensified, drowning out her thoughts with a deafening roar, leaving her dizzy and disoriented. "Hey, Ava." Jake's voice broke through the haze, and she turned to find him approaching with a concerned expression. "You okay? You look unwell." "I'm fine," she snapped, the words escaping her lips before she could catch them. "I just need to finish this." Jake's brow furrowed deeper. "You need to take a break. This isn't good for you. We're worried." Ava's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of frustration and fear coursing through her. "I said I'm fine," she retorted, her voice rising. "I can handle this." With that, she turned away from him, pacing deeper into the woods, desperate for solitude. The buzzing grew louder, the whispers echoing in her mind like a broken record. "You're not alone," they said again, weaving through her thoughts. As she stumbled through the underbrush, her mind spiraled further into chaos. The forest felt like a living entity, surrounding her, closing in, suffocating her with its presence. She needed to escape, to find a way out of this nightmare. But the buzzing wouldn't relent. It was a relentless tide, drawing her deeper into the heart of the woods, where shadows danced and whispers beckoned. She was lost, adrift in a sea of sound and confusion, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest transformed into a dark, foreboding entity that swallowed her whole. "Help!" she screamed, the sound swallowed by the night. But the forest remained silent, the buzzing echoing in her ears, a siren song that promised both madness and revelation. Ava was caught in its grip, and there was no escape. As dawn broke over the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest, the sun's rays filtered through the thick canopy, casting a dappled light on the forest floor. Ava stirred in her tent, the warmth of the morning slowly coaxing her from the depths of a restless sleep. The buzzing sound that had plagued her the previous night still echoed in her mind, but it was softer now, almost like a distant memory. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, trying to shake off the lingering fatigue that wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. With a deep breath, she crawled out of her tent, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves, but the familiar buzzing still lurked in the background, a constant reminder of her growing unease. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the noise as nothing more than her imagination. After all, she was here for a purpose, to gather data for her biology project, to immerse herself in the beauty of nature. "Hey, Ava!" Jake's voice called out from a short distance away. He was setting up his own equipment, a small table cluttered with files and notebooks. His bright smile was a welcome sight, a beacon of normalcy amid her spiraling thoughts. "Morning, Jake," Ava replied, forcing a smile as she approached him. "How did you sleep?" "Like a rock." "You?" Ava hesitated, the buzzing rising in intensity as she opened her mouth to respond. "Not great. Just the usual forest sounds, I guess." She tried to sound casual, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Jake frowned, concern flickering in his eyes. "You sure you're okay? You've seemed a little off lately." "I'm fine," she insisted, a bit too forcefully. "Really? Just focused on my research." She turned away, not wanting to delve into the growing anxiety that had taken root in her mind. "All right, but if you need a break, Mia and I are planning to check out that waterfall later. You should join us," he suggested, his tone gentle yet firm. "I'll think about it," Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper as she walked back to her camp. She needed to concentrate, to push through the fog that clouded her thoughts. The buzzing intensified, drowning out the sounds of the forest, and she rubbed her temples, willing the pressure to ease. As the day wore on, Ava immersed herself in her work, collecting samples and jotting down observations. Each time she tried to focus, however, the buzzing crept back into her consciousness, louder and more insistent. It was as if the forest itself was trying to communicate with her, but the message remained frustratingly elusive. She glanced up frequently, half expecting to see something lurking just beyond the trees, but each time she was met only by the tranquil beauty of the woods. At lunchtime, Ava joined Jake and Mia at a small clearing. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground that seemed almost hypnotic. The two were laughing, sharing stories about their experiences in the field. Ava attempted to join in, but her laughter felt forced, a mask she wore to hide her growing anxiety. "Did you see that huge spider over there?" Mia exclaimed, pointing toward a nearby tree. "I swear it was bigger than my hand." Jake chuckled. "You're just imagining things again, Mia. You know how you get in the woods." Ava forced a smile, but her mind was elsewhere. The buzzing had morphed into a persistent thrum, almost like a heartbeat, pulsating through her. She picked at her food, her appetite waning as the sound grew louder, more insistent. "Hey, Ava, you okay?" Mia asked, her voice cutting through Ava's fog. "You've been really quiet today." "I'm fine," Ava replied, a little too quickly. "Just a bit tired. I didn't sleep well." Mia exchanged a glance with Jake, both of them clearly unconvinced. You should really take a break. A little exploration might do you good. We could check out that waterfall. It's supposed to be stunning. I can't, Ava insisted, shaking her head. I need to finish my samples. I can't afford to fall behind. All right, but don't push yourself too hard, Jake warned, his brow furrowed with concern. We're all here to help each other. Just remember that. Ava nodded, but as they finished their lunch, she felt a growing sense of isolation. The buzzing seemed to amplify in her mind, intertwining with her thoughts, making it difficult to concentrate on anything else. She excused herself, retreating to her tent, desperate for a moment of solitude. Alone, she lay on her sleeping bag, staring up at the tent ceiling. The buzzing had transformed into a cacophony, a maddening roar that rattled her nerves. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block it out, but the sound only grew louder, merging with whispers that danced just beyond her comprehension. What's happening? She muttered to herself, panic creeping into her voice. Why can't I think? She closed her eyes, attempting to breathe deeply, to calm the storm inside her head. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer, more demanding. Ava, come to us, follow. Startled, she shot up, her heart racing. I'm just tired, she whispered, trying to convince herself. It's just the forest playing tricks on me. But as dusk approached, the shadows lengthened and the buzzing morphed into a sinister chorus. Ava stumbled out of her tent, disoriented and desperate for clarity. She needed to escape the chaos swirling in her mind. As she wandered aimlessly through the trees, the forest felt alive around her, the air thick with anticipation. The buzzing had become a deafening roar, drowning out her thoughts, and she felt as if she were on the brink of losing herself entirely. Why won't you leave me alone? She cried out, her voice echoing in the stillness. The trees stood silent, and for a moment, she felt utterly alone, lost in the vastness of the wilderness. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a small stream, the water glimmering in the fading light. She knelt beside it, splashing her face, hoping to wash away the torment that plagued her. The coolness of the water offered a brief respite, and for a moment, the buzzing quieted to a dull hum. Ava. A voice broke through her moment of peace. It was Jake, his figure emerging from the trees, concern etched on his face. What are you doing out here? She turned to him, her heart racing once more, the buzzing surging back with a vengeance. I can't take it anymore, she shouted, the panic spilling over. It won't stop. The buzzing, the whispers, it's driving me crazy. Jake stepped closer, his eyes wide with alarm. Ava, you need to calm down. Just breathe. I'm here. You're safe. But as he reached out to her, the sound crescendoed into a roaring wave. No. Don't touch me, she screamed, her instincts kicking in. She stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. You don't understand. You can't help me. Ava, please. Jake pleaded, his hands raised in a placating gesture. You're not alone. We can figure this out together. Just tell me what you're feeling. Feeling? Ava laughed bitterly, her voice laced with hysteria. I'm feeling like I'm losing my mind. I can't think straight. It's like the forest is alive and it's trying to pull me in. Jake's expression softened, the worry in his eyes replaced by determination. We can get through this. Just focus on my voice. You're stronger than this. Don't let it win. But as she looked into his eyes, the buzzing intensified, drowning out his words. Ava felt herself spiraling, the weight of her fear pressing down on her. You don't understand, she cried, her voice cracking. It's too much. I can't escape. I know it feels overwhelming, Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. But you're not alone in this. Mia and I are here for you. Just take a deep breath. We'll find a way back. Ava shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I just wanted to stop. With that, she turned and fled, running blindly through the trees, the buzzing in her mind reaching a fever pitch. She could hear Jake calling after her, his voice fading into the background as she plunged deeper into the forest. Desperation fueled her legs, and she pushed through the underbrush, hoping to escape the relentless cacophony that threatened to consume her. As she ran, the whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a tempest. Follow us, they urged, seductive and insistent. Come to us, but Ava was lost, disoriented in a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The forest closed in around her, the trees looming like sentinels, watching her every move. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root, and she fell to the ground, gasping for breath. In that moment of vulnerability, the buzzing crescendoed, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter her mind. She lay there, her heart racing, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. The whispers wrapped around her like tendrils, pulling her further into the depths of the unknown. Help me, she murmured. Ava lay in her tent, the thin fabric offering little protection against the oppressive weight of her thoughts. The buzzing that had once been a mere annoyance had transformed into a relentless torment, echoing through the very core of her being. It was as if the sound had infiltrated her mind, wrapping around her thoughts like a vine constricting a tree. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping that the darkness would bring her a semblance of peace. Instead, the buzzing grew louder, swelling into a cacophony that reverberated through her skull. The night air was still, but the forest around her was alive, thrumming with a pulse that felt alien and threatening. She could hear the whispers, two indecipherable voices weaving in and out of her consciousness, teasing her with fragmented words that slipped away just as she reached for them. Ava sat up abruptly, her heart racing, the fear and confusion churning within her. How long had she been lying there? Hours? Days? Time had lost all meaning in this surreal nightmare. Get a grip, Ava, she muttered to herself, her voice barely rising above the din. It's just your mind playing tricks. She took a deep breath, attempting to quell the rising tide of panic. But each inhalation only seemed to amplify the buzzing, transforming it into a monstrous entity that clawed at her sanity. Meanwhile, Mia and Jake were huddled around a fire at their own campsite, a flickering beacon in the dark wilderness that had turned so sinister in Ava's absence. They shared worried glances, the unease thickening the air between them. Do you think we should check on her again? Jake asked, his brow furrowed with concern. The shadows from the fire danced on his face, highlighting the tension that had settled there since Ava had begun to unravel. Mia poked the fire with a stick, sending embers spiraling into the night sky. I don't know, Jake. She seemed really out of it yesterday. I thought maybe she just needed some space. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she were unsure whether to voice her growing fears. Space or not, I can't shake this feeling that something's wrong, Jake replied, his tone resolute. We can't just leave her out there like this. The buzzing, it's getting worse, isn't it? Mia nodded slowly, her stomach knotting at the thought of what Ava might be experiencing alone in the dark. Yeah, it's been hard to ignore. I thought it was just the forest or something, but it feels different. Like it's alive. Let's go, Jake said, his decision made. He stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans as he grabbed a flashlight. We need to find her. Now. They moved through the forest, the moonlight barely penetrating the dense canopy above. As they walked, the trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches stretching out like fingers in the darkness. The atmosphere felt thick, charged with an energy that sent shivers down Mia's spine. The buzzing seemed to echo through the trees, a haunting melody that pricked at their nerves. "Do you hear that?" Mia whispered, halting in her tracks. The sound was more pronounced now, swirling around them like a ghostly wail. "It's almost calling us." Jake's expression hardened. "We have to keep moving. We can't let it distract us." He pushed forward, the beam of his flashlight cutting a path through the gloom. As they navigated the underbrush, the buzzing grew louder, transforming into an overwhelming roar that threatened to swallow them whole. Mia felt her heart race, the sound wrapping around her like a shroud. "What if she's in trouble?" she breathed, her voice trembling. "She's in trouble," Jake replied, urgency lacing his words. "That's why we need to hurry." After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached Ava's campsite. The sight that greeted them sent a chill down both their spines. The tent stood empty, flapping listlessly in the wind. Ava's belongings were strewn haphazardly, as if she'd left in a hurry. The buzzing intensified, morphing into a deafening roar that reverberated through the trees, making the very ground beneath them tremble. "Mia, look." Jake pointed toward the edge of the clearing. A series of footprints trailed away from the campsite, leading deeper into the forest. "She must have gone this way." The two exchanged a look, a silent agreement forming between them. They followed the tracks, the buzzing sound pulling them forward like a siren's call. As they moved deeper into the woods, the shadows thickened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with an unnameable anxiety. The trees leaned closer, their branches entwining as if they were conspiring against the two researchers. "Do you think she's okay?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper as they pushed through the underbrush. "I don't know," Jake admitted, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "But we need to find her. We have to." They pressed on, the buzzing now almost deafening, drowning out the sound of their footsteps. It was as if the forest itself was alive, pulsating with an energy that both exhilarated and terrified them. The whispers returned, swirling around them, a disembodied chorus that tugged at the edges of their consciousness. Suddenly, Mia stopped, her breath hitching in her throat. "Jake, do you see that?" She pointed ahead, where the trees parted to reveal a narrow path, its ground covered in a carpet of leaves that glistened in the moonlight. "What is it?" Jake squinted into the darkness, his instincts screaming that something was off. "That light, it's coming from over there." Mia gestured again, her heart racing. "Maybe it's her." They hurried down the path, the buzzing growing increasingly frenetic, as if it sensed their approach. The light grew brighter, illuminating a small clearing that opened up before them. And in that moment, they both froze. Ava stood at the center of the clearing, her figure silhouetted against an ethereal glow that emanated from the ground. The buzzing reached a fever pitch, a chaotic symphony that resonated deep within them. She looked disheveled, her clothes clinging to her frame, and her hair wild as it danced in the night breeze. But it was her eyes that struck Jake and Mia the most, wide and unfocused, as if she were gazing into another realm entirely. "Ava," Mia called out, stepping forward, a rush of relief mingled with fear flooding through her. "What are you doing?" Ava turned slowly, her face a mask of confusion and something else, something darker. "Mia." "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to listen. The buzzing, it's trying to tell us something." Jake stepped closer, concern etched on his features. "What do you mean?" "You need to come back with us. This place isn't safe." "No, you don't understand." Ava's voice rose, the urgency palpable. "It's a signal, it's calling me. Can't you hear it?" She gestured wildly, her hands trembling as she tried to grasp the swirling thoughts in her mind. It knows things about the forest, about us. Mia exchanged a worried glance with Jake, the buzzing now a relentless roar that seemed to press down on them. Ava, please. We're worried about you. Just come back with us. Ava shook her head, her expression wild and unfocused. I can't. It wants me to stay. I have to listen. She took a step back, her feet moving as if drawn by an invisible force. Stop. Jake shouted, reaching out to grab her arm, but she flinched away, her eyes darting around the clearing as if searching for something beyond their reach. No. You have to go. You don't understand what it means. Ava's voice was a mixture of desperation and fervor, and the buzzing crescendoed to an almost unbearable level, enveloping them in its chaotic embrace. Mia felt her heart race as she watched her friend slip further into the madness, the light around Ava pulsing in time with the sound. Ava, please. We can help you. But Ava's gaze was distant, her connection to reality slipping away like water through her fingers. In that moment, the forest felt alive, a living entity that held secrets in its depths, and the buzzing carried with it an echo of something sinister lurking just beyond their sight. As the shadows lengthened and the buzzing reached a deafening climax, Jake and Mia stood paralyzed, caught between the urge to save their friend and the encroaching darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The air in the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest was thick with tension, a palpable weight that only Jake and Mia could feel as they trekked through the underbrush. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows that danced eerily among the trees. Each step they took was accompanied by the unsettling buzz that had plagued Ava for days. It echoed in their ears, a relentless reminder of their friend's deteriorating condition. Do you think we'll find her? Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She brushed aside a low-hanging branch, her eyes scanning the dense foliage for any sign of Ava. Jake remained silent for a moment, his expression grim. We have to, he finally replied, determination hardening his features. She wouldn't just wander off. Something's wrong. As they continued deeper into the forest, the buzzing intensified, a chorus of disembodied voices seemingly rising from the earth itself. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. What if Ava was right? What if there was something out here, something that had drawn her in? Jake, do you hear that? Mia stopped abruptly, tilting her head as if trying to decipher the sounds surrounding them. He nodded, his heart racing. It's getting louder. Almost like it's calling to us. Mia shivered at the thought. Let's keep moving. We can't let it distract us. They pressed on, the underbrush thickening around them, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The forest felt alive, each rustle and snap of a twig echoing like a warning. Do you think she's scared? Mia asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jake glanced at her, worry etched on his face. I can't imagine what she's going through. We need to find her before we lose her completely. Hours passed as they called out Ava's name, their voices swallowed by the oppressive silence of the woods. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie twilight glow that seemed to amplify the buzzing sound, now more of a drone that resonated deep within their chests. Mia, over here! Jake suddenly shouted, rushing toward a clearing. He pushed through the last of the brush, his heart racing with hope. Ava! Mia hurried after him, her breath hitching in her throat as they stepped into the clearing. The scene before them was haunting. Ava lay on the ground, her body curled into a fetal position, muttering incoherently. The buzzing pulsated around her, a cacophony of sound that seemed to emanate from her very being. Ava! Jake called again, rushing to her side. He knelt beside her, shaking her gently. Ava, can you hear me? She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. But instead of recognition, they were clouded with confusion and fear. The voices, they won't stop, she murmured, her breath shallow. They're calling me. I have to go. Go where? Mia asked, panic rising in her voice as she knelt on Ava's other side. Ava, you need to stay with us. But Ava's gaze was distant, her mind trapped in the chaos of her hallucinations. I can't, they want me to listen, she said, her voice trembling as she clutched her head. It's so loud. Jake exchanged a worried glance with Mia. Ava, listen to us. We're here to help you. You need to come back with us. You're not alone. Ava seemed to momentarily anchor herself in reality, her eyes flickering between them, as if she were struggling to remember who they were. Jake? Mia? Her voice was weak, almost a whisper. Yes, it's us. We're here, Jake urged, his heart aching for his friend. We need to get you to a ranger station. You're dehydrated, and we can't let you stay out here like this. Ava shook her head, her fingers digging into the earth. No, they want me to stay. It's safer here. You don't understand. Mia's eyes widened in fear. Ava, please. You're not safe. This place it's affecting you. You need to trust us. Ava looked up at them, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but then the buzzing returned, louder now, drowning out their voices as her mind slipped back into the chaos. We can't leave her like this, Jake said, desperation creeping into his voice. We have to get her out of here, now. With great effort, they helped Ava to her feet, supporting her weight as they began the arduous trek back through the forest. The buzzing clung to them like a shroud, whispering secrets they couldn't comprehend. Each step felt like a battle against the very air around them, thick with unseen forces trying to pull them back into the depths of the woods. Keep talking to her, Mia urged, her eyes darting around the trees as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. She needs to hear your voice. Ava, remember when we first got here? Jake said, trying to keep his tone light despite the dread pulling in his stomach. We found that amazing tree with the twisted roots. You said it looked like a sculpture. Ava blinked, her brow furrowing as if she were trying to grasp the memory. The tree? Yes. The one that looked like it was reaching for the sky, Jake continued, desperation fueling his words. You loved it. You said it was beautiful. We can find it again. For a moment, Ava's expression softened, and the frantic buzzing seemed to fade, replaced by the distant memory of laughter and wonder. Yeah, I remember, she murmured, her voice steadier. It was beautiful. Just keep focusing on that, Mia encouraged, her own fear mingling with hope. You're safe with us, Ava. We're getting you out of here. As they moved, the forest felt like it was closing in around them, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, the shadows shifting ominously. The buzzing rose and fell, a sinister lullaby that threatened to pull Ava back into its depths. She stumbled, her legs shaky, but Jake and Mia held her up. Suddenly, Ava gasped, her eyes wide with terror. The voices are angry. They don't want me to leave. Jake tightened his grip on her, determination igniting a fire within him. They can't have you, Ava. You belong with us. But the buzzing crescendoed, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. The forest came alive, branches creaking and groaning as if protesting their intrusion. Run! Mia shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. We have to get to the ranger station. With Ava between them, they sprinted through the underbrush, the buzzing morphing into a deafening chorus that threatened to drown out everything else. As they burst into a small clearing, the ranger station came into view, a beacon of safety amidst the chaos. Hope surged through Jake as they raced toward it, but the forest felt alive, the branches twisting and reaching out as if trying to halt their escape. Almost there, Jake urged, pushing himself and Ava harder. Just a little further. Finally, they reached the door of the ranger station, and Jake slammed it open, ushering Ava and Mia inside. The cool air was a welcome relief, but the buzzing still echoed in their ears, a haunting reminder of the dark presence lurking just beyond the walls. "Help! We need help!" Jake shouted, his heart racing as he turned to the ranger behind the desk, a look of confusion on his face. The ranger jumped into action, quickly assessing Ava's condition. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "She's dehydrated and she's been hallucinating," Mia explained, her voice trembling as she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. "We found her in the woods." She kept talking about voices and buzzing sounds. The ranger nodded, his expression turning serious as he motioned for them to follow him. "We need to get her treated immediately. I'll call for medical assistance." As they moved into the small treatment area, Ava sat on the edge of a cot, her eyes unfocused. The buzzing still resonated in her mind, a relentless reminder of the chaos she had experienced. "Stay with us, Ava," Jake said softly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. Just breathe." But Ava's gaze was distant, her mind still trapped in the forest's grasp. "The buzzing, it's still there," she whispered, her voice shaky. "It's calling me." "Listen to my voice, Ava," Jake urged, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone. We're here. Focus on us, not the buzzing." Mia stood nearby, her heart aching for her friend. "You're stronger than this, Ava. You can fight it. Just hold on a little longer." Ava's eyes flickered between reality and the chaotic memories of the forest. I can't escape them. They want me to listen. They say I'm special." "No, Ava," Jake said firmly, his grip tightening on her shoulder. "You're not special to them. You're our friend, and we're not letting you go." As the ranger prepared the medical equipment, Ava's breaths grew shallow, her body trembling. "I feel them, they're everywhere," but in that moment, a spark ignited within Ava. Ava lay in her hospital bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with the faint aroma of blooming wildflowers wafting in through the window. The bright morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across her pale skin. Despite the physical comfort of the hospital, her mind remained ensnared in the forest's grip, replaying the haunting echoes of the buzzing that had consumed her thoughts and dreams. Each night, as she drifted into a fitful sleep, the buzzing morphed into a melody, a siren song that promised safety and knowledge, captivating her senses and leaving her restless. In the days following her rescue, Ava's body was healing, but the scars of her experience lingered in her mind. Jake and Mia visited often, their concern palpable as they settled into the chairs beside her bed. Jake's brow furrowed with worry, while Mia's cheerful demeanor felt forced, as though she were trying to mask the anxiety that had gripped her since Ava's ordeal. "Ava, you're looking better," Mia said one afternoon, her voice a soothing balm that momentarily eased Ava's turmoil. "The doctors say you're recovering well." "Yeah, just a few more days and you'll be out of here," Jake added, leaning forward with earnestness. "But we want to talk to you about something." Ava turned her head slowly, the weight of their gazes heavy upon her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mia exchanged a glance with Jake, her expression shifting from concern to determination. "We want to go back to the forest," she stated firmly. "We need to understand what happened to you. It's like there's a mystery that needs solving." Ava's heart raced at the thought. The forest had become both a sanctuary and a prison, a place of beauty that had turned into a labyrinth of her fears. "You don't understand," she murmured, pulling the thin blanket closer to her chin. "It's not safe. The buzzing, it's not just noise. It's something else." Jake's expression softened. "But you're the only one who heard it, Ava. We have to know what it was. What if it's still out there, doing something to the wildlife? We could help." "Help?" Ava echoed, memories flooding back of the whispers that danced just beyond her comprehension, of the way the forest had transformed into a living entity that watched and waited. "I don't think we can help. I think we need to leave it alone." "But we can't just leave it like this," Mia interjected, her voice rising slightly in frustration. "What if there are more people out there? What if it happens again?" Ava felt the weight of their concerns pressing down on her. She had promised herself she would never return to that place of torment, yet a part of her ached for the answers that lay buried beneath the surface. "If we go back, it has to be together," she finally relented, a shiver of dread racing down her spine. "I can't face it alone." The three of them made a pact, an unspoken commitment to unravel the enigma of the forest. Once Ava was discharged, they gathered supplies and prepared for their return. The day they set off was bright, the sun shining cheerfully as if to mock the darkness that lingered within Ava's heart. As they drove toward the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest, the familiar landscape unfolded around them, lush greenery, towering trees, and the distant sound of a flowing stream. The beauty was almost surreal, but Ava felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "What if it's worse this time?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake reached over, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "We'll stick together. We'll watch each other's backs." Mia nodded vigorously, her eyes sparkling with determination. "And we'll find the source of that buzzing. We're scientists, right? We can't let fear stop us from discovering the truth." As they hiked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The air thickened with anticipation, and the once comforting sounds of nature began to warp into something sinister. Ava's heart raced as flashes of her previous experience flickered through her mind. She could almost hear the faint echoes of the buzzing, teasing her from the depths of the trees. After several hours of trekking, they reached the clearing where Ava had first encountered the overwhelming sound. "This is where I was," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake surveyed the area, his brow creased in thought. "It feels different," he murmured, almost to himself. "Like the forest is holding its breath." Mia stepped closer to Ava, her presence a grounding force. "We need to stay alert. If we feel anything off, we turn back, okay?" Ava nodded, her gaze scanning the treetops. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting intricate patterns on the forest floor. But just beneath the surface of beauty, a tension pulsed, and Ava could feel it in her bones. As they set up camp for the night, the familiar sounds of the forest began to shift. The laughter and chatter faded, replaced by a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to resonate through the ground. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she recognized the sound. The buzzing was back. "Do you hear that?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. Jake and Mia exchanged glances, their faces shifting from curiosity to concern. "It's probably just insects," Mia suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "No, it's different this time," Ava insisted, her breath quickening. "It's like it's calling to me." Jake stood, his expression tense. "We need to figure out where it's coming from. Let's follow it." As they ventured further into the woods, the buzzing grew louder, enveloping them in a cocoon of sound. Ava felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic force urging her forward. "This way," she said, leading the way as if compelled by an unseen power. They trudged deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around them, their branches intertwining overhead. The buzzing morphed into a melodic tune, almost enchanting, weaving through the air like a siren's call. Ava's pulse quickened with a mix of fear and fascination. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing, and what lay before them made their hearts stop. Nestled in a thicket of underbrush was an abandoned research facility, its structure partially hidden by the encroaching foliage. The building bore the scars of time, cracked walls, shattered windows, and vines creeping up its sides, reclaiming it as part of the forest. "What is this place?" Mia breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ava stepped forward, her heart racing. "I don't know, but I think it's connected to what I experienced." As they approached, the buzzing intensified, reverberating through the air like a living entity. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But Jake pressed on, curiosity overriding caution. "We have to know what's inside. This might explain everything." Inside the facility, they found remnants of a past long forgotten, papers strewn across the floor, equipment covered in dust, and the faint glow of monitors flickering to life as they entered. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of secrets, and as they wandered through the dimly lit halls, Ava felt the buzzing shift into something more sinister. "Look at this," Mia said, kneeling beside a scattered pile of documents. "These are research papers, experiments on sound waves and their effects on wildlife. They were trying to manipulate animal behavior." Ava's heart sank as she pieced the puzzle together. The buzzing, it wasn't just noise. It was a byproduct of their experiments. They created something that shouldn't exist. As they continued to explore, Ava stumbled upon a large control room. In the center stood a console filled with dials and switches, some still flickering with residual energy. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "This is where they conducted the experiments." Suddenly, the buzzing crescendoed, enveloping them in a deafening roar. Ava clutched her head, panic rising within her as the melody twisted into a cacophony of sound. "We need to get out," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Jake and Mia rushed to her side, their eyes wide with fear. "We can't let it take us," Jake yelled, trying to drown out the noise. "We have to find a way to shut it down." In a frenzied panic, Ava's gaze darted around the control room, searching for anything that could stop the onslaught. Her fingers brushed against a large red button, and without thinking, she slammed her palm down on it. Silence fell like a curtain, the buzzing abruptly cutting off as if the forest itself had taken a breath. The monitors flickered and dimmed, the eerie glow fading into darkness. Ava leaned against the console, her heart racing, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "What did you do?" Mia asked, her voice shaky. I think I stopped it," Ava replied, her breath labored. "But we need to leave. Now." As they exited the facility, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the weight of the buzzing lifted from the air. The path back felt clearer, though the shadows of the trees still loomed ominously around them. Once they reached the safety of their campsite, the reality of what they had uncovered settled over them like a heavy fog. The forest was no longer just a backdrop for their research. In the heart of Minnesota's Chippewa National Forest, where the trees whispered secrets to those willing to listen, Sam Parker felt a thrill of excitement ripple through him. For a passionate linguist, the world around him was a tapestry woven with languages, dialects, and the subtle nuances of communication that transcended mere words. Clad in a sturdy pair of hiking boots, cargo shorts, and a lightweight backpack filled with essentials, he set off on a solo trek into the lush greenery, eager to immerse himself in nature and perhaps find inspiration for his current research on ancient languages. As he walked along the winding trails, sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting a mosaic of shadows on the forest floor. The scent of damp earth and pine filled the air, invigorating and fresh. Sam paused frequently, taking in the sights and sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the occasional distant call of a deer. Each step seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the wilderness, and he felt a sense of belonging, as if the forest were a living entity embracing him. "Isn't it beautiful?" he murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. He adjusted the straps on his backpack and continued deeper into the woods, eager to explore. The forest was vast and uncharted, a labyrinth of towering trees and underbrush that seemed to hold untold stories within its depths. After an hour of hiking, Sam stumbled upon an impressive oak tree, its gnarled trunk wide enough to require several people to encircle it. He approached the tree, marveling at the intricate patterns of its bark. As he examined it more closely, something peculiar caught his eye. There, etched into the bark, were scratches that formed what appeared to be letters or symbols. He stepped back, his heart racing. The markings were eerily reminiscent of ancient runes, a language he had only studied in books. Could it be? He said aloud, the excitement bubbling within him. He pulled out his notebook and a pencil, his hands trembling slightly as he began to sketch the scratches. They seemed deliberate, as if someone, or something, had carved them into the oak with purpose. This could be a breakthrough, he thought, his mind racing with possibilities. An undocumented dialect or a lost language. As he continued to document the markings, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that danced ominously around him. The forest, once alive with the sounds of nature, began to grow eerily quiet. Sam felt a chill creep up his spine, but he brushed it off as mere fatigue. He had come too far to turn back now. The thought of deciphering this potential linguistic treasure ignited a fire in him that overshadowed any lurking fears. With determination, he decided to set up camp nearby, hoping to return to the tree at first light. He gathered some fallen branches and twigs, quickly fashioning a small fire pit. As he lit a fire, the flickering flames cast a warm glow around him, pushing back the encroaching darkness. He settled into his sleeping bag, the crackling of the fire providing a comforting backdrop against the stillness of the forest. Sam pulled out his notes, feverishly reviewing what he had recorded so far. "If I can just decode these symbols," he mumbled to himself, "it could change everything." His mind raced with hypotheses, each more elaborate than the last. He envisioned academic papers, lectures, perhaps even a book dedicated to this newfound discovery. The thought of recognition and accomplishment fueled his obsession. As the stars twinkled overhead, he allowed himself to drift into a restless sleep, his dreams filled with swirling symbols and whispers echoing through the trees. The boundaries between reality and imagination began to blur, a dangerous prelude to the journey he was about to embark upon. The next morning, Sam awoke to the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the trees. He stretched and hurriedly prepared himself, fueled by a sense of urgency. After a quick breakfast of trail mix and a swig of water, he dashed back to the oak. His heart raced with anticipation, and he felt as if the forest itself was guiding him, urging him to uncover its mysteries. As he arrived at the towering oak, he was struck by a sense of reverence. The scratches seemed to shimmer in the morning light, alive with potential meanings waiting to be unveiled. He knelt before the tree, his fingers tracing the markings with a mix of awe and trepidation. "What secrets do you hold?" he whispered, the forest silent in response. He pulled out his notebook, flipping through pages filled with notes and sketches. "If only I could understand," he murmured, deep in thought. The more he studied, the more he felt an inexplicable connection to the forest, as if it were beckoning him closer, pulling him into its depths. Time slipped away unnoticed as he immersed himself in the markings. Hours passed like mere minutes. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and soon the shadows began to stretch longer again. Just as he was about to take a break, a faint sound caught his attention, a rustling in the underbrush. He looked up, squinting into the dappled light, but saw nothing unusual. Just the wind, he reassured himself, forcing a smile. Yet, the feeling of being watched lingered, prickling at the back of his neck. He shook off the sensation and returned to his studies, convinced that the scratches held the key to something monumental. As dusk approached, Sam knew he should prepare for another night in the forest. He gathered more firewood and set up his camp, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over him. The markings on the oak occupied his thoughts, and he resolved to return to them first thing in the morning. He sat by the fire, jotting down his thoughts and theories, the flames casting a flickering light that danced upon his face. "I wonder who created these markings," he mused aloud, his voice barely breaking the stillness. Was it a lost civilization? A group of ancient scholars? The thrill of possibility sent shivers down his spine. The forest, cloaked in shadows, felt alive, almost as if it were sharing its secrets with him. As the fire crackled and the stars emerged in full splendor, he noticed the temperature dropping. A gust of wind rustled the leaves, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he heard whispers, soft and melodic, weaving through the trees like a gentle breeze. Sam's heart raced, a mixture of fear and curiosity igniting within him. "Is someone there?" he called out into the night, half expecting an answer. The forest remained silent, but the whispers lingered in the air, teasing the edges of his consciousness. Was it his imagination running wild, or was the forest truly alive with voices from the past? Deciding to quell his unease, Sam settled into his sleeping bag, the warmth of the fire providing a comforting cocoon. He closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him, thoughts racing through his mind. He envisioned the markings, each stroke and curve forming a complex tapestry of meaning, and he felt an overwhelming urge to decipher them, to unlock the ancient language that lay hidden within the forest. As the hours passed, the whispers grew louder in his mind, mingling with the rustling leaves and the soft hoots of owls. Sam's dreams turned into a cacophony of voices, urging him deeper into the woods, beckoning him to uncover the truth. Little did he know that this obsession would lead him down a path of darkness, one that would blur the lines between reality and the unknown. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sam felt a sense of urgency wash over him. He needed to return to the oak, to immerse himself in the markings once more. The forest awaited, and he was determined to unveil its secrets, unaware of the shadows that lurked just beyond the trees, watching his every move. As Sam ventured deeper into the heart of the Chippewa National Forest, the towering trees began to close in around him, their thick trunks casting long shadows over the forest floor. His mind, once filled with excitement and the thrill of discovery, now wrestled with a creeping sense of disorientation. The scratches he had found on the oak tree had ignited something primal within him, a relentless curiosity that pushed him to explore every inch of this vast wilderness. Armed with a small notebook and a pen, he meticulously documented each marking he encountered, convinced they were remnants of an ancient language waiting to be deciphered. "Each scratch tells a story," he whispered to himself, his voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "If I can just find the key." With each passing hour, the sun's position shifted, yet Sam paid little attention to the movement of time. He had lost himself in the beauty of nature, but also in the labyrinthine tangle of his thoughts. The forest was alive with sounds, the chirping of birds, the wind whispering through the branches, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Yet, there was something else, a subtle undercurrent of noise that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. It was as if the forest itself was breathing, urging him onward, deeper into its embrace. After a long day of exploration, Sam set up camp in a small clearing, the dying light filtering through the leaves. He lit a small fire, the flames flickering and dancing, casting shadows that flickered against the trees. As he sat cross-legged on the ground, his notebook lay open, filled with sketches and notations of the scratches he had found. He could almost feel the weight of the forest pressing down on him, the urgency of his quest growing stronger. "I'm close," he muttered, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. "I just need to keep looking." The scratches had begun to form patterns, almost like a language he was on the brink of understanding. He leaned closer to the page, scribbling furiously, desperate to capture the revelation he felt hovering just out of reach. The dim light made it hard to see, but he was too engrossed to care. "Let's see, vertical lines, diagonal intersections," he murmured, tracing imaginary lines in the air with his finger. "Maybe it's a form of pictographs." As the fire began to die down, Sam felt a chill creeping into the air. He wrapped his arms around his knees, trying to find warmth. The forest, though beautiful, was also foreboding, and the darkness seemed to amplify the sounds around him. He heard a branch snap in the distance, and instinctively, his heart raced. "Just the wind," he reassured himself, but the conviction in his voice wavered. Suddenly, a whisper floated through the air, so soft that he almost missed it. It was as if the wind itself carried a voice, calling to him from the depths of the trees. He froze, straining to hear. The words were indistinct, a blend of syllables that sounded ancient and powerful. "Sam," the voice seemed to beckon, echoing in the recesses of his mind. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice tinged with a mix of curiosity and fear. The forest responded with silence, the only sound being the crackling of the dying fire. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the irrational fear creeping in. "It's just the forest playing tricks on me," he muttered, but the chill in the air felt more pronounced now, wrapping around him like a shroud. As night deepened, Sam lay in his sleeping bag, staring up at the stars that peeked through the gaps in the canopy. The whispers returned, weaving through his thoughts, urging him to continue his search. He felt the weight of the past pressing upon him, the stories of those who had come before, lost in the embrace of the forest. "Find the truth," the voice seemed to echo, sending shivers down his spine. Days turned into a blur as Sam continued to traverse the forest, each day a relentless pursuit of the scratches that had captivated his mind. He followed trails that twisted and turned, leading him to trees marked with symbols that pulsed with an energy he couldn't explain. The excitement of discovery drove him forward, yet with it came a growing sense of paranoia. "Am I going in circles?" he wondered aloud one afternoon, his voice laced with frustration. He glanced at his map, but the lines and markings were becoming more abstract, like the scratches on the trees. "I should have mapped this better." He stopped to lean against a massive pine, its bark rough beneath his fingertips. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath, trying to center himself. "Focus, Sam. You're here for a reason," he reminded himself, but the words felt hollow. As twilight descended, he stumbled upon a cluster of trees that seemed to be covered in scratches, more than he had encountered before. His heart raced with anticipation as he crouched down, tracing the lines with his fingers. They were intricate, layered over one another, forming patterns that danced in the fading light. This is it," he exclaimed, his voice a mix of triumph and disbelief. "This has to mean something." He pulled out his notebook, flipping through the pages frantically, desperate to connect the dots. "If I can just decipher this," but as he wrote, the sense of time began to slip away from him. Hours passed unnoticed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and a sense of unease settled over him like a fog. "Maybe I should head back," he thought, glancing around at the encroaching shadows. But the scratches held him captive, and he pushed the thought aside. Just a little longer, he murmured, almost as if convincing himself. That night, the whispering returned, more insistent than before. It was a chorus of voices, threading through the trees. Sam sat up abruptly, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He strained to listen, his pulse quickening. "Sam, find us," the voices seemed to call, echoing through the darkness. "Who are you?" he shouted, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. "What do you want?" The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement in the shadows, dark figures flitting between the trees. Panic surged through him, and he jumped to his feet, peering into the darkness. "Show yourself," he demanded, but the forest remained silent, save for the soft whisper of the wind. As days turned into a week, Sam's obsession deepened, and the forest began to consume not just his time but also his sanity. He spent countless hours with his notebook, scribbling down notes that seemed to grow more chaotic with each passing day. The lines between reality and the forest's enchantment blurred, and he felt as though he was living in a dream, a nightmare, perhaps. "Am I losing my mind?" he questioned one afternoon, staring blankly at the page in front of him. "Or am I just seeing what others have ignored?" He could no longer tell if the whispers were real or figments of his imagination. They wrapped around him like tendrils, pulling him deeper into the forest's embrace. He felt as though he was becoming part of the very language he sought to understand, a vessel for the voices of the past. "I have to know," he whispered, determination igniting a flicker of clarity amidst the chaos. "I have to unlock the secrets of this place." As he delved further into the woods, the scratches became more elaborate, almost alive in their complexity. They seemed to pulse with energy, whispering secrets that only he could hear. "You're so close," the voices seemed to say, urging him forward, deeper into the shadows. The weight of the forest pressed down on him, and he felt as if he were being watched, but he couldn't bring himself to turn back. "I can't stop now," he told himself, his voice barely a whisper against the backdrop of rustling leaves. "Not when I'm on the brink of discovery." But with each passing day, he felt the grip of reality slipping further from his grasp. The food he had packed dwindled, and he barely noticed the hunger gnawing at his stomach. The shapes in the trees danced in his peripheral vision, and the whispers became an incessant chant that echoed within his mind. "Sam, find us." His sanity teetered on the edge as he stumbled deeper into the forest, drawn to the enigmatic language that seemed to beckon him. It was a dark, alluring pull, and he was powerless to resist. All that mattered was the search, the relentless pursuit of understanding, even as the shadows closed in around him. Sam's heart raced with excitement as he ventured deeper into the Chippewa National Forest, the towering trees casting elongated shadows in the fading light. The forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls, but there was an unsettling stillness that wrapped around him like a thick fog. He had been hiking for hours, his mind buzzing with thoughts of the peculiar scratches he had found on the oak tree. They had sparked an obsession within him, a need to decipher what he believed to be an ancient dialect hidden within the forest. As he navigated through the underbrush, Sam's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of a figure ahead. A woman, tall and lean, stood by a nearby tree, her hands on her hips, as if she were waiting for him. Her short, auburn hair caught the last rays of the sun, and the determination in her hazel eyes was unmistakable. "Hey," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Sam approached her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Why not?" "I'm just hiking." "Yeah, but this forest can be dangerous." "You're not the only one out here." "Some people have gone missing," she warned, her gaze flickering to the trees as if expecting something to emerge from their depths. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not just hiking. I'm on the verge of a breakthrough, he insisted, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. I've found these scratches on the trees, and I think they form words in a dialect I've been studying. Scratches? Jenna raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched on her face. What do you mean, words? This forest has its own language? Sam's passion ignited as he explained, they're not just random marks. They're organized. I believe they're messages from the past, something that was left for someone to find. Look, I get it. You're a linguist, and this is fascinating work. But you need to be careful. The forest plays tricks on you. People get lost, and there are stories. She hesitated, searching for the right words, stories about things that can't be explained. He scoffed, dismissing her concerns. I can handle myself. I've got a map, a compass, and a clear goal. I'm not just wandering aimlessly. Just promise me you'll think about it. It's easy to lose track of time out here, Jenna replied, her voice softening. I've been hiking alone too, but I've learned to respect this place. Sam nodded absently, already turning his attention back to the trees, searching for the next set of scratches that had consumed his thoughts. I'll be fine. Thanks for the warning, but I really need to get back to my work. Jenna watched him for a moment, concern etched on her face. All right, just be careful. I'll be around if you need help, she called after him as she began to walk away. He waved her off, his mind already drifting back to the markings that danced before his eyes. Hours passed as he documented each scratch he found, convinced that they were leading him towards some profound revelation. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. Night was falling quickly, and the air turned crisp. Despite the encroaching darkness, Sam set up camp near a particularly large pine tree, its bark gnarled and twisted. He built a small fire, the flickering flames casting a warm glow that seemed to push back the chill of the night. But as he sat there, surrounded by the sounds of the forest, a sense of unease crept over him. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it an unsettling melody that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He tried to shake off the feeling, focusing instead on his notes, but the shadows danced around him, growing longer and darker as the fire flickered. The forest was alive in ways he hadn't anticipated. It felt as if it were watching him, waiting for him to unlock its secrets. He couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see Jenna's concerned face behind him, but the forest remained empty and silent. As the night deepened, he began to hallucinate. Shadows shifted and morphed into shapes, figures that he could almost recognize but couldn't quite place. They loomed at the edges of his vision, darting away whenever he turned to look directly at them. Is anyone there? He called, his voice shaky. Silence answered him, thick and suffocating. He rubbed his temples, trying to dispel the growing paranoia. It's just the dark playing tricks on you, he muttered to himself, but the whispers of the wind grew louder, almost as if they were responding to him. Sam. Sam, the wind seemed to carry his name, a haunting echo that made his skin crawl. He clutched his notebook tightly, the pages filled with frantic notes and sketches of the scratches he had found. I have to focus, he said aloud, fighting against the encroaching madness. This is important work. But as the hours dragged on, sleep eluded him. The night felt endless, and he was trapped in a cycle of fear and obsession. He could almost feel the presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for him to stumble into its domain. When dawn finally broke, it arrived with a muted light that filtered through the trees, casting an ethereal glow over the forest floor. Sam awoke with a start, disoriented and unsure of how long he had slept. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cold morning air bit in his skin. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of the night's hallucinations. But as he gathered his belongings, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Jenna was nowhere to be found. Her backpack lay abandoned near his camp, the bright fabric contrasting sharply with the earthy tones of the forest. Panic surged through him, quickening his heartbeat. "Jenna," he called, his voice trembling. "Are you here?" No response came, only the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. He rushed to her backpack, rifling through it in a frantic search for any clue of her whereabouts. There was a water bottle, some snacks, and a map, but no sign of her. He felt a tightening in his chest as dread washed over him. Maybe she just went for a walk, he told himself, trying to convince his racing mind. She'll be back any moment. But deep down, he knew that something was wrong. The forest felt different now, like a living entity that was closing in around him. The trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The whispers returned, a cacophony of voices that seemed to swirl around him in a frantic dance. "Jenna," he shouted again, his voice echoing through the trees. The silence was deafening, and his heart pounded in his chest. He stepped away from the camp, scanning the area, but the forest stretched endlessly in every direction. The path he had taken the day before was now obscured by the thick underbrush, and the familiar landmarks he had relied on had vanished. The sense of disorientation crept back in, tightening its grip around him. "Get a grip, Sam," he muttered, forcing himself to breathe steadily. "You need to find her." With a renewed sense of purpose, he began to search the area, calling out her name intermittently. The forest felt alive, the air thick with an energy that both intrigued and terrified him. He retraced his steps, desperate to uncover any sign of her, but the echoes of his calls were swallowed by the trees. After what felt like hours of searching, Sam stumbled upon a clearing. The sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating the ground with patches of warmth. In the center, a large boulder jutted out, and as he approached, he noticed something strange at its base. Scratches, more scratches, just like the ones he had been obsessively documenting. But these were different. They were deeper, more pronounced, and they seemed to form a pattern that sent shivers down his spine. He knelt beside the boulder, tracing the markings with his fingers. They felt warm to the touch, pulsing with an energy that was both enticing and alarming. "What are you trying to tell me?" he whispered, his mind racing with possibilities. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes pulled him from his thoughts. He turned sharply, heart racing. "Jenna," he called out, hope surging within him. But the moment of anticipation faded into dread as he realized he was alone once more. The forest seemed to close in around him, shadows lengthening and twisting, creating shapes that danced at the periphery of his vision. He stumbled back, disoriented, the markings on the boulder blurring in his mind. "Focus, Sam, focus," he urged himself, feeling the weight of paranoia creeping back in. "You need to find her. You have to figure this out." But as he stood there, uncertainty gnawing at him, he could feel the forest shifting, the trees whispering secrets he was not meant to know. A chill ran down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that he had disturbed something ancient and powerful. As the sun began to dip again toward the horizon, Sam felt the grip of fear tightening around him. The shadows grew longer, and in that moment, he realized he was no longer the observer. He was part of the forest story, entwined in it. The sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the forest floor as Sam stumbled through the underbrush, his senses dulled by exhaustion and the gnawing pangs of hunger. The once vibrant colors of the Chippewa National Forest had morphed into a monotonous palette of deep greens and browns, each tree blending into the next, and a sense of wonder he had felt on the first day of his hike was now a distant memory. Days had blurred into one another, and time had lost its meaning. He had lost track of how long he had been wandering in this wilderness, ensnared by an obsession that threatened to consume him whole. With a trembling hand, he pulled out his well-worn notebook, the pages crammed with erratic scrawls, sketches of tree scratches, and half-formed thoughts. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, swirling around in his mind like a chaotic storm. "It's a code," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "I know it is." He flipped through the pages, his finger tracing over the symbols he had painstakingly documented. They were everywhere, on the trees, etched into the bark, hidden in the shadows. They were his obsession, and he believed they held the key to unlocking the forest's secrets. Sam's makeshift shrine, a collection of stones, twigs, and moss, stood proudly around a massive oak, its gnarled branches reaching out like the arms of an ancient guardian. He had adorned it with bits of string and scraps of paper, each piece representing a fragment of his mind, a desperate plea for understanding. He knelt before it, his heart racing as he felt the weight of the forest pressing in around him. "If I could just decipher one more message," he thought, "just one more, I'll understand." The forest was quiet, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. But within that silence, a sound broke through, a faint whisper, almost like a voice carried on the wind. Sam's head snapped up, his heart pounding in his chest. "Jenna," he called out, the name spilling from his lips like a prayer. He had not seen her since the night she had warned him about the dangers of the forest, her cautionary words echoing in his mind. "You need to leave, Sam. This place isn't safe." But he had been too wrapped up in his pursuit to heed her warning, too consumed by the allure of the unknown. "Help me." The voice was clearer now, resonating deep within the shadows of the trees. Sam's breath hitched as he scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. It couldn't be a hallucination. It had to be real. "Jenna," he shouted, his voice cracking. He followed the sound, weaving through the dense undergrowth, branches clawing at his clothes like desperate hands trying to pull him back. But as he ventured deeper into the forest, the whispers faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that sent chills down his spine. The air felt thick, laden with an unseen weight that made it difficult to breathe. He reached a clearing, heart racing as he scanned the area for any sign of her. "Where are you?" he called, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please." Only the rustle of leaves answered him, and in that moment, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. He turned back toward the tree, the shrine, the very essence of his obsession. "It has to mean something," he murmured, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the rough bark. "The scratches, they're a message." With newfound determination, he sank to the ground, pulling out the notebook again and scribbling furiously. "The forest wants to be heard," he wrote, his handwriting becoming more erratic with each passing moment. "The scratches are alive. They speak to me." He could feel the pulse of the forest around him, the rhythm of its heart syncing with his own. "If only I can understand." The shadows lengthened as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest morphing into a realm of darkness and uncertainty. Sam's stomach twisted in knots, a reminder of his neglect for basic needs. He hadn't eaten in days, yet the thought of food felt foreign, even repulsive, compared to the intoxicating allure of the scratches. He pushed the hunger to the back of his mind, focusing instead on the words that seemed to dance just beyond his reach. But as night fell, the forest transformed. The trees loomed larger, their branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching out to snatch him. The shadows deepened, and the whispers returned, this time more insistent, more demanding. "Help me," the voice pleaded again, a haunting echo that sent shivers down his spine. "Sam, Jenna," he called, heart racing. "Is that you?" He stumbled forward, drawn by the sound, but instead of finding her, he was met with a wall of trees towered over him menacingly. The scratches glowed faintly in the moonlight, and he knelt before them, desperate for understanding. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice trembling with fear and anticipation. As he traced the marks with his finger, a jolt of energy surged through him, blurring the line between reality and madness. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a tempest. He could feel them wrapping around his mind, pulling him deeper into their grasp. "You must listen," they urged, a cacophony of voices blending into one. "The truth is here, you just need to see." "See what?" he shouted, frustration boiling over. "What truth?" "I'm trying." But the forest offered no answers, only the oppressive weight of silence. He felt the walls of his sanity begin to crack, the edges of his mind fraying as he struggled to hold on. With a sudden surge of desperation, Sam stood up, his legs unsteady beneath him. "I won't let you take me," he screamed into the darkness. "I'm not afraid of you." But deep down, he felt the creeping tendrils of fear wrapping around his heart, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. He stumbled back to his shrine, the only semblance of solace he had left. As he knelt before it, a flicker of resolve ignited within him. "I'll find the answers," he vowed, the words spilling from his lips like a mantra. "I won't give in. I'll uncover the truth, even if it kills me." The wind howled through the trees, a mournful cry that seemed to echo his determination. And yet, doubt gnawed at him, the shadows whispering insidiously, planting seeds of uncertainty in his mind. "You're lost," they hissed. "You'll never find your way back." As the night deepened, Sam felt the familiar pull of the scratches, the need to decipher their meaning becoming an obsession that eclipsed everything else. He pulled out his notebook once more, scribbling notes with trembling hands, convinced that he was on the verge of a breakthrough. "The language, it's ancient," he muttered to himself, his voice a quiet echo in the stillness. "I can feel it. It's alive." Hours passed as he pored over his notes, the world around him fading into a blur. Each scratch, each mark, became a part of him, intertwining with his thoughts and dreams. The forest was no longer just a backdrop, it was a living entity, breathing and pulsating with secrets waiting to be uncovered. But as dawn approached, the darkness began to lift, revealing a world that felt foreign and unsettling. Sam's heart raced as he looked around, the forest now bathed in an eerie light that seemed to distort reality. The trees, once majestic, now appeared twisted and gnarled, their branches like claws reaching out to ensnare him. "Where are you, Jenna?" he whispered, a sense of dread enveloping him. The whispers had faded, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. He felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him, a heavy cloak that wrapped around his shoulders, suffocating in its embrace. He stood up abruptly, driven by a primal urge to escape, to find something, anything, that could anchor him back to reality. "I can't stay here," he muttered, fear coursing through his veins. But as he turned to leave, the scratches seemed to glow in the morning light, pulsing with a life of their own. "No," he whispered, a sense of reluctance creeping over him. "I need to understand." With a heavy heart, he sank back down before his shrine, the walls of his mind closing in around him. The forest had become a labyrinth, twisting and turning, its paths obscured by shadows and whispers. He could feel the tendrils of madness creeping closer, threatening to pull him under. "I will not be lost," he vowed, clenching his fists as he stared into the depths of the forest. "I will find the truth, even if it costs me everything." The forest responded with a soft rustle, the leaves whispering secrets that only it could understand. And as Sam knelt there, lost in his thoughts, he felt the weight of those whispers enveloping him once more, drawing him deeper into their embrace, into the heart of the darkness that awaited. In the heart of the Chippewa National Forest, the air was thick with the whispering of leaves and the distant calls of wildlife as the sun dipped below the horizon. Sam sat hunched beneath the gnarled branches of his makeshift shrine, the rough bark digging into his back as he clutched a tattered notebook filled with his frantic scrawls. His eyes flickered over the words etched into the tree trunks around him, familiar yet foreign, each scratch a puzzle piece he was desperate to fit together. The forest loomed around him, a labyrinth of towering trees and shifting shadows, and he could feel its weight pressing down upon him. Maddening, he muttered to himself, the sound of his own voice a fragile tether to reality. It's all connected. I know it is. The scratches formed patterns, words that danced just beyond the reach of his understanding. He had spent days tracing them, each line a thread in a tapestry woven by an unseen hand. They're warnings, or maybe a history, he whispered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. I'm close. I can feel it. As the darkness deepened, he shivered, not from the chill in the air, but from the creeping dread that clawed at the edges of his mind. The forest, once a sanctuary for his linguistic pursuits, had transformed into a prison of his own making. He had lost track of time, days slipping away like grains of sand through his fingers. Food was scarce, and he felt his body weakening, but the hunger for knowledge gnawed at him even more fervently. A rustle in the underbrush sent his heart racing. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing into the void. The only response was the soft sigh of the wind, but Sam felt eyes upon him, watching, waiting. He shook his head, attempting to dispel the growing paranoia that had become his constant companion. It's just the forest, he reassured himself, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his confidence. In the distance, the faint sound of voices reached his ears, growing louder, a cacophony that mingled with the rustling leaves. Sam's heart raced as he strained to hear. "Help! Sam!" The voice was unmistakable. It was Jenna. He leaped to his feet, his body protesting as he stumbled toward the sound. "Jenna!" he shouted, desperation lacing his words. He dashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at his clothes, his mind racing with images of Jenna lost and alone. But as he followed the sound, it faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the forest. "No, no, no," he panted, panic flooding his veins. "This can't be happening." He stumbled into a clearing, breathless, his eyes darting around for any sign of her. Instead, he found only the familiar patterns carved into the trees, more scratches that seemed to mock him with their silence. "Why won't you tell me what you mean?" he yelled at the forest, his voice cracking. "What is this?" When the voices returned, they were softer, almost seductive, whispering secrets he could almost grasp. "Sam. Sam." They echoed around him, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. "Come closer, the truth awaits." He sank to his knees among the fallen leaves, clutching his notebook to his chest. "What truth? What do you want from me?" The forest seemed to respond with a low murmur, as if the very trees were alive and listening. He could almost convince himself that they were speaking directly to him, that he was chosen for something greater. As the shadows grew longer, Sam's thoughts spiraled into darkness. He was trapped, alone with his obsession, the words on the trees becoming more tangible, more real than the world outside. He scribbled notes frantically, convinced that each new discovery brought him closer to unlocking a hidden language that had been lost to time. "If I can just figure this out," he mumbled, "I can make sense of it all." But the more he wrote, the more disjointed his thoughts became. Fragments of sentences, symbols, and sketches filled the pages, a chaotic reflection of his unraveling mind. "It's a code," he insisted, "a key." Hours turned into days, and Sam's physical state deteriorated. He could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on him, its grip tightening as he became increasingly malnourished and exhausted. "I need to find her," he whispered to himself, but the words felt hollow. He was trapped in a cycle of madness, the lines between reality and hallucination blurring with each passing moment. Then, amidst the haze of his thoughts, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He jerked away, heart pounding. "Who's there?" he shouted, eyes wide with fear. "Sam. It's us. We're here." A voice pierced through his delirium, familiar yet distant. In the flickering shadows, figures began to emerge. They were clad in uniforms, their faces obscured by the dim light filtering through the trees. "We've been looking for you. You need to come with us," one of them urged, stepping closer. Sam shook his head vehemently, backing away. "No. You don't understand. I'm so close. I have to finish this." "Finish what?" another voice asked, softer, filled with concern. "Sam, please. You need help. You're not safe here." He felt a surge of anger, frustration boiling over. "You don't know what I found. You don't understand." He gestured wildly at the trees, at the scratches that had consumed him. "This is important. It's all connected." The rescue team exchanged worried glances, clearly unsure of how to reach him. "Sam, we need to get you out of here." "You're not well," one of them said gently, taking a step forward. But Sam's mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, spiraling deeper into chaos. "No. You can't take this from me. I won't let you." In that moment, he caught a glimpse of something in the tree-line, a shadow moving with an unnatural grace. It was gone in an instant, but the image burned into his mind, a figure watching, waiting. "Did you see that?" he asked, panic seeping back into his voice. "Something's out there." "Sam, focus on us," one of the rescuers urged, stepping closer, hands raised in a placating gesture. "There's nothing out there. Just come with us. We'll help you." But Sam could barely hear the words over the pounding of his heart. "No, you don't understand," he cried, feeling the weight of despair crushing him. "I have to go back. I have to know. Sam." The voice was sharper now, cutting through his frenzy. "We're not leaving you. We have a helicopter waiting. You're safe now." As they reached for him, Sam felt the grip of reality slipping away. He was being pulled from the depths of his obsession, and the forest around him blurred into a haze of greens and browns. "Let me go," he shouted, but the strength of his captors was overwhelming. He was lifted, the world spinning as they carried him through the trees. Desperation clawed at him, and he twisted, trying to break free. "You don't understand. I have to finish this." But as they emerged into a clearing, the whir of the helicopter blades filled the air, drowning out his protests. The light blinded him momentarily, and he felt himself being placed onto a stretcher. A blanket was thrown over him, the warmth a stark contrast to the cold grip of the forest he was leaving behind. As he was hoisted into the helicopter, he caught one last glimpse of the trees, the shadows shifting ominously among them. And then he saw it, a figure, just at the edge of the tree-line, watching him with an intensity that sent a chill through his bones. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he locked eyes with the shadow, a feeling of dread washing over him. "Sam, you're safe now," a voice said, pulling him back to the present. But the image lingered in his mind, a reminder of the secrets he was leaving behind, the truth he felt he had almost grasped. As the helicopter ascended, the forest shrank beneath them, but the weight of his experience remained, a haunting echo of the obsession that had consumed him. He had escaped the physical confines of the forest, but the shadows of his mind would follow him, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of understanding. Chapter 6. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room buzzed incessantly, casting a sterile glow over the pale walls. Sam lay in the narrow bed, The sheets crinkled around him like the leaves of the forest he had recently escaped. A nurse had come in earlier to check his vitals, her face a mask of professional concern. He heard the distant echoes of hospital machinery, a reminder of a world that felt foreign to him now. Outside, the Minnesota sun shone brightly, yet inside, a darkness clung to him like a shroud. Days had passed since he was airlifted from the forest, and yet he felt as if he had never truly left. The whispers still echoed in his mind, a cacophony of voices that seemed to taunt him. He tried to focus on the mundane reality of his hospital room, but the images of his shrine, the scratches on the trees, and the shadowy figures continued to invade his thoughts. "Mr. Thompson?" A doctor entered, clipboard in hand, his brow furrowed. "How are we feeling today?" Sam blinked, struggling to pull himself into the present. I don't know. It feels like I'm still there, in the forest," he admitted, his voice low and trembling. The doctor nodded, taking a seat beside him. "That's not uncommon after such an intense experience. You were lost for days, Sam. Stress-induced psychosis can manifest in various ways, including hallucinations and paranoia. We're here to help you through this." "Help?" Sam echoed, his mind racing back to the vivid hallucinations he had experienced. "You don't understand. There were messages. I was close to uncovering something important." The urgency in his voice surprised him. "I have to remember. Let's focus on the present for now." The doctor's tone was calm but firm. "You need to rest and allow your mind to heal. We can talk about your experience later." Sam felt a surge of frustration but swallowed it down. He had tried to explain to the medical staff the significance of his findings, how the scratches had felt like they were alive, whispering secrets just beyond his grasp. Yet, they only seemed to see a man unhinged by isolation and fear. Hours turned into days as he remained in the hospital, receiving therapy sessions and medication aimed at stabilizing his mind. He was grateful for the care, but a part of him felt lost, tethered to the forest that loomed in his mind like a specter. He spent hours staring out the window, watching the trees sway in the breeze, longing for the connection he had felt among them. One afternoon, while thumbing through a worn-out magazine, a nurse entered with a package wrapped in brown paper. "This came for you," she said, setting it down on the edge of the bed. Sam's heart raced as he noticed the familiar handwriting on the label. It was his own. "What is it?" he asked, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for it. "Not sure." "It was delivered this morning," the nurse replied, her expression unreadable. "You should probably wait for the doctor before opening it." But Sam was already peeling the paper away, his pulse quickening. Inside was a small box, and as he opened it, he found a photograph and a note. The photograph was unmistakably of his shrine, the tree adorned with his notes and offerings. His heart sank, a chill racing down his spine. How could someone have taken this picture? He flipped the note over, his breath hitching as he saw the scrawled words in the obscure dialect he had been studying. The letters danced before his eyes, teasing him with their familiarity. Panic surged through him. It was a message, but he couldn't decipher it. "Sam?" The doctor's voice broke through his rising hysteria. "What do you have there?" He looked up, panic etched on his face. "It's a photo of the shrine. Someone was there, someone else. And this note, it's in the language I was studying. Let's take a look." The doctor leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he examined the note. "We can have a linguist analyze it, but I want you to focus on your recovery first. What do you think it means?" "I don't know. I was so close to understanding it all. And Jenna, she was there. She had to have been." The name slipped from his lips with a mixture of longing and dread. "Jenna?" The doctor's gaze sharpened. The hiker you mentioned? The one who warned you about the forest? Yes, Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. She was trying to help me. But then she disappeared. Was she ever found? The doctor hesitated, then said, as far as I know, there hasn't been any news about her since the search. But it's possible she was involved in something deeper, perhaps even related to your experience. We'll look into it. Sam nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, spiraling into a labyrinth of questions. Had Jenna played him for her own research? The thought clawed at him, mixing confusion with anger. He had trusted her, believed she understood the forest's allure just as he did. Days passed, and the hospital became a blur of therapy sessions and medication adjustments. Each night, Sam lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows resembling the trees he had come to know too intimately. The whispers grew louder, and his dreams morphed into vivid reenactments of his time in the forest, filled with the scratching sounds and the lingering presence of figures watching him from the darkness. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting an orange hue across the sky, he found himself pacing the small room, his mind racing. He needed answers. The note was a key, a connection to Jenna and the truth he had been seeking. Can I help you? The nurse's voice interrupted his thoughts. I need to see the linguist, he blurted out. I need to know what that note says. The nurse frowned. I can arrange that, but you need to promise to take it easy. You're still recovering. I will, he insisted, desperation lacing his voice. I have to understand. It's the only way to put this behind me. With a reluctant nod, the nurse left the room, and Sam's heart raced. He felt a flicker of hope, a spark of purpose igniting within him. The next day, a linguist entered his room, a tall man with glasses perched precariously on his nose, and a clipboard in hand. Mr. Thompson, I understand you have a note that needs translation. Sam nodded, handing over the note with trembling hands. I found it after I got out of the forest. It's in a dialect I was studying, but I can't make sense of it. The linguist examined the note closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is intriguing. It appears to be a mixture of several ancient languages, possibly linked to the indigenous tribes of this region. There are themes of knowledge, warning, and a connection to nature. What does it say? Sam pressed, his heart pounding. After a moment, the linguist looked up, his expression serious. It speaks of a guardian of the forest, a protector of secrets. It warns against seeking knowledge that wasn't meant to be uncovered. It suggests that those who persist may lose themselves in the process. Sam's stomach twisted. Is that what happened to me? Did I lose myself? The linguist nodded slowly. It's possible. The forest holds many mysteries, and some are better left undisturbed. You may have touched on something that transcends mere language, a deeper, perhaps darker, aspect of existence. Jenna, Sam whispered, realization dawning on him. She knew. She was part of it all. Who? The linguist asked, tilting his head. A researcher, Sam explained, his voice shaking. She was studying the forest, the scratches, just like I was. But she used me to uncover something she didn't want to share. The linguist's expression softened. Sam, it's important to remember that your experience is your own. The forest can be a powerful teacher, but it can also lead us astray. You need to focus on your own healing. But as Sam lay back against the pillows, he felt a gnawing emptiness inside him. The more he learned, the more questions arose. What had he truly uncovered? And where was Jenna? The shadows of uncertainty stretched long before him, and the whispers of the forest echoed ever louder in his mind, promising truths he had yet to grasp. In the weeks that followed, Sam's recovery progressed, but the sense of dread remained. He was released from the hospital, but the forest still beckoned him, a siren call that tugged at his heart. The photo and note haunted him, and he found himself standing at the edge of the Chippewa National Forest once more, the trees looming like ancient sentinels. "Why are you back?" a voice startled him, and he turned to see a familiar face. Jenna stood there, her expression unreadable. "Jenna?" Sam's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief flooding his senses. "You were missing." I know," she interrupted, her tone guarded. "I had to leave. There are things you don't understand." "Then help me," he pleaded. "I need to know what really happened. What did we uncover?" Jenna's gaze shifted to the trees, and for a moment, the weight of the forest seemed to press in on them both. "Some knowledge is dangerous,"